Hello, hello. This is your boy Shrimp once again, back to you for more art grind, art with adventure. So I almost said Monster Hunter Rise there. Should remember what you're streaming at right now. So your boy Shrimp is here. Back to you more with some sketching, designing, and stuff like that. Before I go and proceed more, I would like to check my audio first before anything else happens. Um, let's see. I'll just mute this for a minute. All right. So yeah, okay, that's good. I think my audio is all right. I can hear myself crisp and clear. So right now, guys, we're back for about a few weeks of not streaming with my art grind. I'll probably do a lot more of this because it's holidays this week. So I'll probably stream twice this week for more art grind and for more Monster Hunter Rise, so that I can catch up with some content that I haven't yet been uh, reaching yet. So let's see what I can do within this holidays of me not having any work. So I'll see what I can do with more stream time. But for now, let's proceed with things that I need to do. For now, if you can see my cover right now, I've changed it to volume 6. I've realized when I was checking out the volumes, I was actually following the wrong guidelines for the chapters that I'm reading and comparing it to the volume cover that I've been following. So sorry about that. So yeah, I think I've skipped a volume cover, but you can check it out if you want to see that volume 5 cover. It's pretty nice also. But for now, we have this wonderful cover of Vandally here with Kanata and Titan Princess. I can't remember her name though. Uh, well, we'll be refreshed with that later as we proceed with the volume. But definitely, this cover will probably not last a long time because we're about to finish this volume, volume 6. And when that happens, yeah, I'll change this to the next volume 7 cover. Okay, but anyways, we're back to this. From what we left off, we finished some really wonderful designs for this mechs. Like, uh, like this horse and this bat that I did last time. And for now, we're gonna proceed with the rest of the sketch that I would like to add. Mm, if we can squeeze like 3 more in here, and with my longer time right now, probably stream for around 3 hours. I'll probably finish 3 sketches for different kinds of animals that I'll turn into mechs. So yeah, let's see what we can do with that. And I have some few plans for it right now. I'll do a raptor first. The dinosaur, Velociraptors. I'll try to sketch one mech Velociraptor, and I'll probably do something bulky, something heavy type. Because most of what I did here are all skinny, yeah, skinny type of mechs. It's I'll look for something, probably a rhino or an elephant, and then or something even still a dinosaur. Let's pick a triceratops. Yeah, triceratops. That's the right name for that dinosaur. Mm, but it depends. I'll see what I can think of. Depends on my mood when I look at my collections of in my Pinterest. But yeah. Let's see. So yeah, back to the Death Mage who doesn't want a fourth time. We're now in chapter 82, and let's if I could remember correctly, yeah, they just defeated Kanata, retrieved the souls of the Titans that were betrayed back then, and now they're proceeding to take revenge against uh, the city that betrayed them, the alliance that betrayed their country, and now they're going to proceed to do some more progress in developing their very own country. And Vandally gave up on his plans of becoming an adventurer. I think they're in the one of the those poor towns that he visited recently. He went back there, and I think there's some few developments that will happen in that in this chapter. And yeah, I think that's enough of me talking, and let's proceed with me drawing here and us listening to more of the Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Continue supporting me if you've liked this content, guys, and just remember, if you want to read more of some different kinds of stories or novels, like novels, web novels, stuff like that, you can check out the descriptions down below. There's a link for where I'm reading this in Novels.pl. Check it out if you want to go up and ahead and read on your own when you're got curious to this wonderful web novel that I'm listening right now. Okay, guys. So yeah, that's enough. I'll talk to you guys later. Okay.
Chapter 82, The Shadow Gnawing at the Slave Run Mine and the Approaching Threat. After completing his job change, Vandally left the 7th cultivation village and used flight to catch up with Eleonora and the others, who had gone ahead of him. But there were a lot of giant ravens around today, and flying over the trees would be troublesome as he would run into them, so he was flying at a height below the tree's branches, weaving in between the trees. Suddenly, there was a plopping sound and Vandally felt an unpleasant sensation on the back of his head. Thinking that bird excrement or a tree's fruit had fallen onto him, he stopped and ran a hand through his hair, but there was nothing there. But it felt as if there was something crawling around. Even though he tried tracing the sensation with his finger and using out-of-body experience to look at the back of his own head, there was no sign of the object that had fallen onto him. Well, whatever. Danger sense, death wasn't responding, and though it was ticklish, it didn't really bother him. He decided to leave it be. Rod Corti became aware of the destruction of Kaido Kanata's soul before the Circle of Transmigration system raised its alarm. Although there was no chance that Kanata would turn into an undead, Rod Corti had already realized that there was a chance that he would have his soul broken by Vandally or be turned into a member of one of Vida's races. Of course, this would have been a needless worry if Kanata had been able to dispose of Vandally, but in the end, he had been defeated. And it wasn't just a mere defeat. The situation is one step away from being the absolute worst it can be, Rod Corti murmured to himself. It was unfortunate that Kanata's soul had been broken, but the reward Rod Corti had promised Kanata if he was able to defeat Vandally, this reward was to reincarnate him into a world with no magic or monsters, similar to Earth, as the peerlessly handsome son of a rich family. Because Rod Corti had already removed Kanata's soul from the system to prepare to grant him this reward, his soul's destruction hadn't caused large damage to the system. The problem was that Kanata had blurted out to Vandally that the rest of the people reincarnating from Origin would be coming to kill him, and that even if they were killed in Lambda, they would be reincarnated again right away. This had caused Vandally to become warier and made him think that the people trying to kill him would reincarnate endlessly unless he broke their souls. In reality, things are not going that well. Even after Kanata had reincarnated in Lambda, 3 of the reincarnated individuals in Origin had died. The fact that Shinmari had killed Kanata, and the fact that she had done so because of the evil deeds he had been doing in the shadows, had become clear. Because of these events, there were fewer casualties than Rod Corti had expected, but it seemed that the group of reincarnated individuals had been disbanded. Although they had all been reincarnated from the same Earth and been riding on the same boat, they were a group of people who didn't necessarily all share the same views. And within 3 years of reincarnating in Origin, there would have been changes to their sense of values. The reason they had been part of a single group up until recently was likely due to the great presence of Amamiya Hiroto, whose ability was far above the others. The problem was that the 3 who had died hadn't been happy about Rod Corti's request. They had been surprised that the undead they had killed was someone who had been reincarnated from Earth like them, but when asked to kill him again in Lambda, they had shaken their heads. Rodcorti had tried offering them rewards similar to the ones that Kanata had asked for, but they had still declined. They had told him that they had no intention of killing Vandalia even if they were to begin life again normally as children, let alone being reincarnated as adults immediately to work with Kanata. I'm tired of killing others. I want to live a normal life. He has no way of telling us apart from everyone else, right? In that case, I don't want to get involved with him. Work with Kanata? Is that a joke? Even if he was our former comrade, I went through hell because of what he did. The first refused to engage in any fighting whatsoever, the second refused to get involved with Vandalia, and the third refused Rodcorti's request because Kanata was more deserving of hate than Vandalia. Like in Origin, Rodcorti had given those reincarnating in Lambda destinies so that they would meet each other again, but it was unclear as to how they would act once they met Vandalia. They could do as they said and try not to get involved, but the opposite was also possible. If Vandalia were to become someone who caused great harm to the countries and cities that they reincarnated in, they wouldn't be able to ignore him. They might even try to become his allies, but considering the disgraceful behavior Vandalia had shown directly after his death in Origin, Rodcorti couldn't imagine it likely that Vandalia would accept them. Well, I do not know what will happen until I see things unfold, Rodcorti said to himself. I cannot predict what Vandalia is truly thinking. To think that he would remove the seal on a part of the Demon King and even go as far as to absorb it. In Lambda, there were some who were making use of fragments of the Demon King, but no matter how much mana Vandalia had, he should have been taken over by the part of the Demon King he had absorbed and lost his sanity. Well, it matters not. I can use this as something to convince the others who will reincarnate in Lambda. Rodcorti would tell them that Vandalia was a dangerous individual who was removing the seals on the Demon King. He could not afford to tell this information to the gods of Lambda, however. If Alder and his subordinates were to learn of this, they would start hunting not only Vandalia, but the rest of those reincarnated in Lambda as well. Rodcorti had been worried that Kanata's thoughtless behavior had caused Alder to sniff out Rodcorti's actions, but it seemed that Alder and his subordinates were still oblivious to the existence of those reincarnated from Origin. Perhaps they had assumed that Kanata was simply a criminal with a unique skill, or perhaps they were busier than Rodcorti had imagined and simply didn't have the time to look through the records from a few of their followers. Either way, I suppose I should tell the next ones to reincarnate there that Vandalia can break souls, that he has regained the power he had in Origin, and that he has even surpassed his old power in some aspects. Rodcorti had kept these facts from Kanata, thinking that it would be problematic if he became fearful, but as a result, he had underestimated Vandalia and attacked him with no sense of apprehension and no plan whatsoever, leading to his defeat. If he told them about the danger of having their souls broken, they would be vigilant. There would probably be many who would decline his request as a result, but this would still be no better than losing a great number of them pointlessly. It appears that the discord in Origin has settled down. Now then, I shall wait a while, Rodcorti decided. The ruins that had been occupied by the Goblin King were completely different now. The outer walls remained the same, but there were now many buildings built in rows on the inside, and watchtowers had been built as well. It was as if the city had been restored. But if one were to see the individuals gathered in this city, they wouldn't think that it had been restored at all. Ah, everyone, though I am no longer alive, I am able to meet all of you again, a woman murmured in the city's center, her voice full of emotion. She was a beautiful Titan woman with dark skin, abundant curves, and hair and eyes of a color resembling flames, wearing a flame-like leotard. But her legs stopped just above her knees, and she was floating in the air. Her flame-like hair and leotard were actually made of flames. Livia, the former first princess of Taylorsheim, had become rank 5 Blaze Ghost after defeating Kaida Kanata. Princess Livia-sama, we curse you, Duke Hartner. Princess Livia was surrounded by hundreds of undead titans. I'm sorry, everyone. We couldn't protect a single thing that you entrusted us with. Don't say that. It's the traitorous Hartner family that's at fault. They're sons of Beaches who killed you and burned Princess Livia at the stake. Borkus roared in rage. Kid, let's go and raid that slave-run mine right now, save those guys and then overrun this duchy. There, said Vandalia, pacifying the enraged Borkus as well as the other titans. Let's calm down. I said it before, but overrunning the duchy is dangerous because Heinz and his party are here. In fact, it was indeed possible to inflict enormous damage to this duchy with the forces that Vandalia had available to him. Any castle wall would crumble with a single sword swing from Borkus, a powerful rank 10 undead. Soldiers and knights wouldn't even work as meat shields against him. The other undead and Vandali himself would be accompanying him as well. They would spread deadly disease and poison around, kill men and women of all ages, turn them into undead and repeat the cycle of slaughter. It would be an army of the dead that increased in numbers for each victim it claimed. But there would be Heinz, an adventurer with ability worthy of S-Class, and his party, the 5 Colored Blades. There would be other A-Class and B-Class adventurers as well. And if things got bad, there would be support from the other duchies of the Orborm Kingdom as well. In that case, Vandali's army would lose. So, let's settle for only attacking the slave-run mine for now, said Vandali. That's fine, said Borkus. Let's get going. I'm telling you, you can't, said Vandali, stopping him. It wasn't that he was scared of failure. With the combat prowess of Borkus and the other undead titans, they would effortlessly defeat the soldiers guarding the slave-run mine that wasn't even on the front line of the war, and easily reduce their watchtower to rubble. It would be terrible if all of the slaves got caught up in it and died, wouldn't it? Vandali pointed out. If the titans attacked forcefully, there was no telling what circumstances would arise from the panic they would cause. The disordered soldiers might try to use the slaves as shields or decide to rape female slaves before their impending deaths. And there was also a chance that the slaves would think that Borkus and the rest were simply monsters who had come to kill them rather than those who had come to rescue them. If they decided to kill themselves, thinking that it would be better than being eaten alive, that would be problematic, though Vandali didn't want to mention this to Borkus and the other undead titans. With that being the case, we'll infiltrate first and make them understand that we're there to save them, said Vandali. Borkus made a dissatisfied noise. There's no other choice. But what are we going to do about the Duke's family? He asked. I've made a scandal go public, sunk their castle and taken back some of the treasures they stole, so let's leave it at that for now, Vandali replied. He had destroyed the underground graveyard and sunk the castle in order to conceal the fact that he had removed a seal of the Demon King. This was something that would cause anyone's face to pale if they learned of it, though he wasn't aware of this because of how simple it was for him to build, repair or even move buildings with Golem transmutation. The castle probably wouldn't collapse anytime soon, but it was a national symbol for the Hartnett Duchy and, in times of war, a point of defense. It was therefore necessary for a new one to be built, but this would probably require a vast sum of money. As long as Vandali didn't help them, anyway. By the way, Botchan, about the treasures you took back, said Saria. Yes, I'm holding on to them right now, said Vandali. He had taken about half of the stolen treasures back from the castle, the rest of them had been scattered and lost. They were items that had been given to noble families as rewards, potions that had been consumed or treasures that had been donated to the Orborm Kingdom's central region, sold for support under the pretense of donation. What remained was mostly jewelry rather than precious, expensive magic items like the item box. According to the spirits that had been haunting the Duke until recently, the item box was still around, but it was being used for transporting goods to a military base connected to the former Sauron Duchy. Borkus's magic sword that was broken by Mikhail had also been a national treasure given to him by Talersheim's king, so there had been fewer magic items among Talersheim's national treasures to begin with. Other than a few like the second Princess Zandia, the Titan race wasn't suited for magic and Talersheim had been isolated for 100,000 years, so excluding the relics left behind by Zakat, it had been a magically underdeveloped nation. But let's have Braga and the rest take them back for us, said Vandali. Braga and the rest of the Black Goblin unit were planning to return to Talersheim with Marie and the other girls who were their lovers. Vandali had asked one last time to make sure that the girls really wanted to do this, but their decision hadn't changed. I think it will be hard, but I will consider myself reborn and live with this person. I'm sure it will be fine. This person isn't a human, and yet, he is far kinder to me than any man has ever been. I'll treasure these two. Braga had become the husband of two of them and suddenly appeared mature. This must be the presence of a popular man, Vandali thought, but Braga turned on him and glared at him with half-closed eyes. King, I don't know what you're thinking, but you're way more popular with the women than I am, said Braga. It's not like I'm not aware of that, said Vandali, who was currently being embraced from both sides, buried in abundant valleys. Phew, seeing Botchan for the first time in a while feels really good, said Rita, a look of ecstasy on her face. You're right, said Saria, looking shy and yet unable to disobey her desires. I know it's wrong, but I really can't be separated from him. Both of them were embracing Vandali. He was now at the age where he was starting to become conscious of the opposite sex, so he wished that they would stop doing this in front of others, though. You too, Stop clinging to Vandali-sama already, Eleonora said to them. You're fine because you've been with him this whole time, Eleonora-san. We've been staying in Taylorsheim. Rita protested. Eleonora-san, us maids suffer withdrawal symptoms if we are separated from our master for more than 3 days, said Saria. I'm not sure if being a maid is really that kind of occupation, Vandali said calmly, but for some reason, it seemed that Eleonora had accepted their points. It cannot be helped, she said. But make sure you do not tire Vandali-sama out. Apparently, it couldn't be helped. Yes, said the sisters in unison. Rita and Saria loosened their grips slightly, making it a little easier for Vandali to breathe. Since their bodies were made of spirit form other than their armor, they provided a coolness that was perfect for the summer heat, so being embraced by them was actually comfortable as long as they let him breathe. Botchan, all of the ghouls, Rapisage, Porvina-chan and, most importantly, Dasa-sama waiting for you in Taylorsheim, so you should prepare yourself while you still can. Wow, I'm super popular, aren't I? It seemed that Vandali would be embraced passionately once he returned to Taylorsheim. His heart, which had splintered from the events in the Hartner Duchy, would be repaired. Am I secreting something from my body? Vandali wondered. Something like Vandanium, vitamin V or Van acid. There were no scanning devices in Lambda so he couldn't be sure, but it was possible that some unknown nutrients and minerals existed. Suddenly, he heard a small, grinding noise. Ah, Botchan, there's a large centipede in your hair. Large centipedes. They were rank 1 monsters, centipedes around the size of medium-sized snakes. Their diets consisted mainly of small animals such as mice and insects, and they didn't harm produce. As such, they were often considered to be useful creatures. However, sometimes they climbed into trees and grabbed onto animals that passed beneath them in order to transport themselves around. Come to think of it, you said you underwent a job change to insect user, didn't you? Have you already tamed this one? Saria asked. Looks like I did, without even knowing about it, said Vandali. After crawling around the surprised Vandali's head, the giant centipede disappeared beneath his hair again. I wonder just what it's like in my hair? Well, it seems to be harmless so I don't really mind, he said. Is it really harmless? Eleonora was frantically searching for the centipede inside Vandali's hair, but she seemed to be unable to find it. It's fine, Vandali told her. It doesn't hurt, anyway. He did feel a ticklish sensation that felt like an insect was crawling beneath his skin, however. I'll call him Pete, he decided. Now that he thought about it, he had the feeling that there was a Japanese god who had concealed centipedes in his hair. Which god was that, again? As Vandali suddenly tried to dig up his past memories, Princess Laville approached him smoothly and called out to him in a shy-sounding voice. Is it alright if I? But the one who responded wasn't Vandali, but Rita. You too, Princess? Yes. For now, going beyond holding hands with your majesty is but I believe it is natural for things to go that way, said Livia, whose flames grew brighter. Judging from her expression and behavior, it was probably a sign of embarrassment, similar to one's cheeks growing red. Natural for things to go that way. Well, I suppose you are right, Eleonora agreed. The daughter of the former royal family and the new king historically, it is not unusual. Though the majority of such cases are tragedies or political marriages, Sam added. According to these two, Vandali and Livia ending up in that way would be a natural course of events. Wow, said Vandali. Everyone is coming to an agreement. That was how things were apparently going to go. Vandali wasn't particularly dissatisfied with it, and Princess Livia was essential for using his dead spirit magic skill, so it would be convenient for her to be with him. Emotionally speaking, he was also happy to be adored by a beautiful woman. Thanks to his physical age, Vandali's desires of that sort were still questionable, but it was only natural for him to prefer people he thought were beautiful. He had already been entrusted with the left hand of Princess Livia's younger sister, Princess Zandia, as well. All right, go ahead and marry her, kid. I didn't think you'd paint Princess Livia with your colors before Zandia Junction, but that's how a man is, said Borkus. Borkus, where did your anger and hatred from earlier go? Vandali asked. That's that, this is this, he replied. I understand. Let us support Botchan together, said Rita. Thank you very much, said Livia. We were born and died in different places, but we stand together after death, said Saria. I have not died yet, but if you are devoted to Vandali-sama, then we are companions, said Eleonora. By the way, that item of clothing you are wearing, is that supposed to be competing with us? Asked Rita. No, this is made of my flames, Livia explained. I can make them more like a dress, but making its surface area greater requires more mana, so I am being more efficient. It seemed that the women had reached a conclusion. Please take care of me for the many years to come, Livia said to Vandali. And you too, if possible, great sisters, she added to Ritu and Saria. Being embraced by the beautiful Titan who would have been more than 2.5 meters tall if she had legs, Vandali felt as if he had been completely surrounded. I have a long future ahead of me, Vandali told her. I'm going to live for millennia, after all. Incidentally, Livia and the fire ghosts could control their heat, allowing them to lower it to the same temperature as a bath. Though Livia's flames were warm, they weren't enough to burn. She gave a giggle as she covered Vandali in these flames. So you say, but our lifespans are unlimited. We are already dead, after all. You got me there, said Vandali. Eleonora and the undead blessed the quiet couple, but there were also those who felt a sense of danger. Honey, could it be that Vandali-sama is the type who uses anyone he can lay his hands on? Asked Marie. She and the other lovers of the Black Goblins felt anxious about the way the king of the nation they were about to move to handled his relationships with women. They had almost no knowledge of politics, but it had been said that the philandering of kings of the past was the greatest among the causes of their nation's demise. That's not true, king chooses his women properly, said Braga, reassuring them. Although the Hartner Duchy was adjacent to the boundary mountain range, its mineral resources were limited. This was because even underground areas of the mountain range were danger zones where monsters ran rampant, making it impossible to work there, and because no promising veins of ore had been discovered in other mountains. Thus, the Hartner Duchy had been discovered in other mountains. Thus, the Hartner Duchy had been dependent on several dungeons as well as the mine on the southern tip of the duchy for its mineral resources. But the ore yielded by that mine had decreased drastically around 200 years ago and had never recovered. When the duchy had still been conducting trade with Taylorsheim, they had continued importing metal while searching the mine for new veins of ore, but these efforts had been given up now. The miners had vanished from the mine and been replaced by walls like those of a prison, soldiers and slaves. Now, it wasn't normal miners, but mostly criminal slaves who were mining and smelting the ore. But in the mine's earlier days, it was run not by criminal slaves, but the women of children of Taylorsheim who had been made criminal slaves on false accusations, so they were handled differently from how one might normally expect. Although the exterior looked like a prison, there was a village of slaves on the inside. The criminal slaves would normally be treated worse than horses or cattle in a mine, but the Duke of the Past had apparently feared that some might have survived the destruction of Taylorsheim. It had been unknown as to whether the A-class adventurers, the Sword King Borkus and the Saint Giena, as well as the tiny genius Zandia, were alive or not. The reality was that the three of them had been killed by Mikhail, but subordinates of the pure-breed vampire Gubberman had stolen Giena and Zandia's remains, while the third subordinate ran into and engaged in mortal combat with the fatally wounded Mikhail. Thus, the Hartner Duchy had no accurate information on these heroes. That was why the Duke had needed hostages, just in case they had survived against all odds. Princess Livia would have worked as well, but if he had left her alive, it was possible that the other duchies would have used her as a symbol to put the blame on the Hartner Duchy rather than the Amid Empire. Also, Titans had robust bodies, and even their children were capable of greater physical labor than an adult human. That was why they had been used in the mines while the utmost care was taken to ensure that they were not worked to death. As time passed, this treatment of the Titans had become normal and the slaves of the slave-run mine were granted a living environment that would allow for living there for longer periods of time than other mines. There was a city of soldiers who managed a family who had essentially been born as slaves. That was how things were in the mine. In this slave-run mine, there was a pair of soldiers amusing themselves with idle talk as they watched over the miners who were working with collars on their necks. I've heard about it, but they don't know when new goods will arrive, one of them said. Yeah, something about a monster rampage occurring at the city, right? I'm sick of hearing about that, said the other. The traveling merchant who had transported supplies of food and such to the mine, who had arrived yesterday and left this morning, had delivered news that a monster rampage had occurred at the city of Niaki. This news had spread throughout the entire mine. Soldiers who had been born in Niaki had given the merchant letters to deliver to their families. But the two soldiers who were talking in this spot had been born elsewhere, so the monster rampage wasn't any of their business. But that means that there won't be any noisy new recruits, so isn't it a good thing? Well, that's true from time to time. We get guys who hesitate to kill goblins and throw up, too. The soldiers assigned to this slave mine were largely divided into two different kinds. There was the retired group, who were made up of those who couldn't work on the front lines due to age or injury but had been assigned here because they would go hungry or turn to crime if they were fired. The other group was made of new recruits, who had been sent here to perform exercises and training because this was a vast region with only weak monsters such as goblins. This pair of soldiers were a part of the former group, and when new recruits were sent here, these soldiers would have to take care of them and their workload would increase. Those from noble families born as the third or later son had a lot of pride, so they were particularly troublesome. They were merely new recruits in rank, but at the same time, they were noblemen and future government office candidates, so they had to be treated carefully. If the soldier's superior officer had things together, this would be easier, but the current governor of this slave-run mine was Viscount Besser, an honorary nobleman. He had been a nobleman of Lord Lucas's faction who was involved in military affairs, but he had made a blunder that caused him to be demoted. He was someone who believed that noblemen were superior beings, declaring that only noblemen were real humans. It didn't need to be said who Viscount Besser favored more between the commoner-born soldiers like these two and the young men who were frail, but still born from noble families. Still, the good's not coming is we've had nothing to hunt but goblins these days, too. Now that you mention it, there are a lot of goblins for some reason. There have been less of them more recently, though. I wonder if a king has appeared nearby? Stop that, it's ill omened to say stuff like that. What I'm trying to say is, with no goods and no tasty things to eat, there's no enjoyment in our everyday lives. Well, we are in a place like this. The slave-run mine wasn't an adequate workplace for these soldiers. If they wanted to eat something tasty, they had to go out and hunt. Of course, there were no theaters, show tents or street performers to ease their daily boredom. For these soldiers, their only sources of pleasure they had were the supplies provided by the traveling merchant and a little shopping. That, and the goods. For now, we have the goods that were brought yesterday, right? Haven't you seen it? There wasn't a single quality person among the goods that arrived yesterday. You're just being too greedy. They're just slaves being brought to the mine. It'd be stranger if there were any quality ones, wouldn't it? The goods that the soldiers had been talking about were slaves. Of course, they weren't provided to the soldiers in order to provide enjoyment by putting on performances. There was that female bandit that became a criminal slave and was brought here, wasn't there? Well, her face was nice, but she had no chest. Her mind seemed a little broken, too. And that was years ago, man. The slaves being brought to this mine were the slave traders stockpiled unsold products who had become a burden on him. In fact, most of them were criminal slaves, the kind that nobody wanted to buy. But of course, some of them were women. Those women became playthings for the soldiers. There are always the titans, right? The women among Taylorsheim's refugees were treated the same way as well. Unlike some people, I happen to not like giant women. It kind of feels like they're looking down on you. And if we do it too much, we're the ones who are going to get punished, so you can't go too crazy. Ah, man, won't those cultivation villages hurry up and become ghost towns? No, we get punished if we do it too much with the other slaves, too. There was the time we went crazy and some of them died, remember? The Viscount was screaming at us not to reduce our working force for no reason. You're right. It can't be helped. I'll just choose one at random for now. That one will do, I guess. One of the soldiers' eyes had stopped upon a white-haired child slave who was wearing a cloth over one eye. The child's dead-looking eyes weren't unusual to see among the slaves working at the mine, but perhaps the soldier had been attracted to her white skin that looked as if it hadn't ever seen the sun. Oi, isn't she too small for that? His partner questioned. It doesn't matter, right? She won't even survive until next month anyway. What I do is just going to shorten her already short life by a bit. The soldier called out to their white-haired slave who was pushing a cart full of ore, pulled her away and took her away somewhere. Of course, they were still on duty, but this kind of thing had been occurring for a long time, so Viscount Besser overlooked it as long as the soldiers didn't do it in front of the new recruits. Naturally, the other soldier overlooked his partner's actions as well. However, his partner returned less than 20 minutes later. Thinking it strange, the soldier called out to him. Oi, that was unusually quick. What happened to that slave? If she died, did you at least dispose of her body properly? Though the slave was a child, the soldier didn't consider her life precious for a moment. But he knew that it wouldn't be good to leave her corpse alone. There would be insects everywhere, and if there was an outbreak of disease, he would be at danger as well. As the soldier called out to his partner, His partner moved only his eyeballs to look at him. "Everything is fine." "There is no problem," replied the soldier's partner. His face was as expressionless as a doll's. "Oi, are you really all right?" "I am really all right. I am perfectly normal." "No, you're not looking fine at all. Go and have the priest donor take a look at you." The soldier grabbed the shoulder of his partner, who was clearly not behaving normally, and tried to take him to the priest, who also served as a doctor. He called out to another soldier as well. "Hey, this guy's acting strange. I'm going to take him to the priest donor and have him checked out," he said. The other soldier that he had called out to approached, as if wanting to help out. "Is everything all right? I shall help out as well." "Yeah, thanks." "Oi, get a hold of yourself." Not even looking at the third soldier, the first soldier walked away, looking at the face of his colleague, who was also his friend, with a worried expression. Seeing the two soldiers return and continue working as if nothing had happened, another soldier called out to them. "Are you all right? You look a bit pale." "Yes, we are fine. It is just a lack of sleep. After visiting the priest donor, we feel better. How about you go and visit the priest donor too? You will feel brighter." I see. I'll sit out on that one." The soldier who had called out to the pair stiffened his expression at their eerie behavior as he returned to his post. A child slave with white hair and skin pushed a cart past him, but it seemed that the soldier was more concerned about the strange behavior of his colleagues. The empty eyes of several soldiers stared at his back. The level of the mental encroachment skill has increased. Name, Livia rank, 5 race, Blaze Ghost level, 0. Passive skills, Spirit form, level 5 mental corruption, level 5 heat manipulation, level 6 flame nullification materialization, level 5 augmented mana, level 3 active skills, housework, level 5 projectile fire, level 5 possession, level 3 monster explanation, fire ghosts, flame ghosts, blaze ghosts. These are monsters created when evil mana contaminates the spirits of victims who were burned to death or criminals burned at the stake with deep hatred in their hearts. Many of them are evil monsters who have gone mad with the pain of being burned to death, losing their previous memories and even their ability to reason, simply attacking the living in order to have them join them. When criminals burned at the stake are buried, they are revived as these monsters and try to attack people. They progress from fire to flame to blaze in terms of how dangerous and powerful they are. Their main method of attack is to employ body slams and unarmed attacks with their burning bodies, while those that have preserved more of their intelligence are capable of using long-ranged attacks by firing the flames that make up their body as projectiles. But the most dangerous is their possession. Unless exorcised, those possessed experience the agony of being burned alive until they suffer the worst death in absolute madness. Physical attacks are mostly ineffective unless they use their materialization skill. They cannot be defeated without martial skills or magic of attributes other than the fire attribute. Despite having spirit form bodies, they produce magic stones, but as they do not provide any other materials, they are unpopular monsters to hunt among adventurers. The ghosts of Livia and the warriors who were her guards transformed into these monsters after Vandali's mental encroachment skill caused them to remember the feelings of defeat they felt when they were killed, so they possess most of their former memories. Also, these monsters normally look like moving, burnt corpses, but Livia and her guards mostly resemble their appearances of when they were alive other than missing their feet, knees and half of their thighs, wearing clothes made of flames. They can exert their power beyond their limits due to Vandali's dead spirit skill and vast mana pool. Chapter 83, The Difference Between Making Requests and Making a Selection. In the residential area for the slaves inside the walls of the slave-run mine in the village of slaves, the most important, decision-making figures among the Titan slaves had gathered together. Normally, there would be eyes observing the residential area and the Titans would never be allowed to gather together unless instructed, so that they couldn't plot rebellions. But all of the soldiers that were posted as guards right now were behaving like dolls. Livia-sama, isn't that Livia-sama? Yes, she looks a little different from how I remember, but there is no mistake. How could I mistake Livia-sama for anyone else? So, it was true that you would bring Livia-sama here. Seeing the Titan's eyes open wide in blank amazement with tears streaming from them, Livia's flames flickered in her happiness, but at the same time, her hand was placed over her chest in sadness. Everyone, thank you for staying alive until this day. I failed to protect you and made you suffer, she said. For Titans, who had lifespans of 300 years, 200 years was a long time. Those who had been elderly individuals during that time had perished long ago, and most of the adults of the time were also gone. Those who had been children back then were now adults. Until the age of 15, Titans age at about the same rate as humans, and after that, they age slowly, their bodies reaching their peaks at around the age of 200. From the age of 250 onwards, they start growing physically old. For this reason, few Titans actually have an aged appearance. It's fine, everything is Duke Hartner's fault, the one who betrayed us. Livia-sama, you kept us in your thoughts even after you died, didn't you? That is more than enough for us. And you're helping us like this now. That's more than enough. Nobody, not my mother, not my grandfather, not my younger brother, would blame you, Livia-sama. The Titans were all extremely thin and had bad complexions. Many of them still had whip marks and burns remaining on their arms, legs and faces. Their treatment at the mine had been somewhat mild compared to how other criminal slaves were treated, but they were still treated cruelly. The soldiers had done whatever they wanted, thinking, it's fine as long as they don't die, and, it doesn't matter if one or two of them die. In fact, all of the elderly had died early, and quite a few of the women and children had also died because they were unable to endure this treatment. Their spirits hadn't been sealed away magically by anything like a champion's barrier, many of them had already vanished from the mine long ago. I don't know how you did it, but the soldiers watching over us are like dolls right now, and you've brought Livia-sama to us, said Gopher, Balkus's daughter. Everything you said was true. I couldn't believe the words of a midget like you at first, but then, does that mean that it's true that you're going to rescue us from this mine, Van? It's Vandali, Gopher-san, said Vandali. I don't mind if you call me kid like Balkus does, though. He had blended in among the slaves and used the mental encroachment skill to reduce all of the soldiers into vegetative states, one by one. But please don't call me midget, he added. I'm overly conscious about that. Races like Titans and Beast people had a sense of values where they believed that size was equivalent to strength and being small meant being weak. Even if this weren't the case, Vandali, who was small even compared to other children of the same age, probably looked unreliable to the Titans whose women could reach heights of 2.5 meters. Death attribute charm wasn't working after all, communication with living people was difficult. I'm really glad I brought Princess Livia here, Vandali thought. Gopher gave him a wry smile. It's just like that Oyaji to be so energetic even when he's dead, she laughed. I won't be calling you kid. Livia-sama is calling you your majesty, so isn't it strange for me to call you that? You don't have to worry about that, said Vandali. Anyway, at this point, I'm thinking about freeing everyone from this mine. But that's not as simple as it sounds, is it? Asked Gopher. We have slave collars on our necks. Slave collars, collars of servitude, they have various different names, but they are magic items that ensure that slaves do not disobey the wills of their masters. If slaves try to cause harm to their masters or make an escape, the collars cause them suffering by suffocating them or releasing an electrical shock. There are numerous ways of removing them, but the master's approval isn't the only thing that is needed. In addition, normal curse-breaking spells cannot undo them. Special spells are required, but they are kept secret. You won't be able to remove them even if you defeat the governor of this mine, said Gopher. Even you couldn't simply. I can remove them, said Vandali. Before he could even hear the Titan's surprised cries, he released Black Death attribute mana that surrounded Gopher's collar, which unfastened with a click. No way. Gopher and the other Titans were dumbfounded as the heavy collar hit the floor loudly, but Vandali had previously used his mana to brute force his way through a seal left by a champion. Something like this was simple for him. How many times can you do that in one day? Gopher asked. There are over 500 of us in total. It costs about 1,000 mana for each person, so I can handle 300,000 people's worth and still have some left over, said Vandali. You can really do it? Sorry, but time is also a problem, so it would help if you kept that number below 10,000. Alright, I understand. You can really free all of us within the day, right? With this, we can fight, shouted another Titan. Everyone, His Majesty is a little shy, said Livia. And the soldiers standing guard are all allies, but if your voices are too loud, I know, Livia-sama. So, what should we do? When are we going to rise to action? For weapons, just pick up the pickaxes and shovels we normally use, hell, even grab a rock. I'm sure those tools and rocks will feel lighter than they've ever felt before. Those bastards, I'll teach them a lesson. The Titans were excited about being freed from their unjust imprisonment and finally having a chance to retaliate. Although Vandali looked expressionless, he was actually flustered. unable to find a good time to chime in. But he managed to open his mouth now. Tonight, in the middle of the night, he said. I see, tonight. Wait, hang on a second. That's too early. Although it was too early to be called the middle of the night, the sun had already set completely. There wasn't enough time to free all the slaves and begin an uprising. If they went on a rampage with no plan, the soldiers would cause severe casualties among the slaves, who were significantly inferior to them when it came to combat. And it wasn't as if all of the slaves would join the uprising immediately. There are slaves who have already given up on everything, unlike us, said Gopher. We need time to convince them. Even if they don't need to join us, we need to ask them to stay hidden. You're not planning to use the same method on them as you did on those soldiers to turn them into dolls, are you? The moment Gopher raised this question, suspicion appeared on the faces of the other Titans. It couldn't be helped. It would be stranger if they didn't feel fear for Vandali, who had shown himself capable of reducing people into vegetative states in less than an hour. This was a very healthy reaction, so Vandali didn't pay any attention to it. No, I won't be doing anything like that, he told them. But we'll be carrying out this plan in the middle of the night. There won't be any problems. Like I said, there's not enough time if we do that, said Gopher. Not at all, there's plenty of time, Vandali reassured her. We will have occupied this mine by the early morning tomorrow. It won't matter if some people don't help us, everything will be done by the people I've called here. What did you say? The Titans were dumbfounded. They did believe that Vandali had come to rescue them. But they had been under the assumption that he would require their cooperation as well. However, Vandali didn't need their cooperation at all. He had declared that no matter what the Titans thought of him, he had decided on a time and would occupy the mine with his own strength. So then, why had the Titans gathered here beforehand? This was what Gopher and the others were wondering now. But Livio answered this question. We want everyone to stay where they are tonight, she said. And after that, you must decide whether you wish to become citizens of the new Talersheim or not. The slave-run mine, which had been as sturdy as a fort, quietly surrendered and was occupied by the time the morning sun rose. The soldiers' dinner had been poisoned. The soldiers had consumed their food without noticing the odorless, tasteless poison and entered comatose states in their beds. There had been a very small number of soldiers with resistance skills who realized that something was wrong and tried to tell this to their colleagues who were still on their feet. But those colleagues, the ones that Vandali had turned into dolls, took them by surprise and restrained them. Viscount Bessa, who had been sleeping, as well as his knights and servants, were all captured alive. And the soldiers who had been positioned on the outer walls as lookouts couldn't do anything even after realizing that something was strange about the rest of the soldiers. There is an armed force approaching. Those are Titans high. Undead Titans. With a terrifying roar, Balkus and the others charged in from the front of the mine at a speed surprising for their size. The lookouts blew their horns and rang their bells to indicate a state of emergency, but none responded. No, some did respond, but this was not the response that they had desired. We're going to slaughter you all anyway, so entertain us as you die. Steel Cutter. Armor Break Ear. Iron Pierce. Balkus and the other undead Titans unleashed martial skills, one after another, against the outer wall. The wall and gate were cut, broken and pierced through as if they were made of tofu. They found amusement in seeing the soldiers being sent flying alongside the pieces of rubble. And so, the next morning, Balkus and the others, who had reduced the outer wall and soldiers who had been watching them into ruins. There's something lacking, Balkus murmured, scratching his exposed cheekbone as he looked down at Viscount Bessa's soldiers and 100 or so civilians, who were bound and unconscious. If you enjoyed yourself to your heart's content, this mine would have turned into a wasteland, wouldn't it? Vandali pointed out. I wouldn't be that wild, Balkus protested. I'd at least leave some rubble behind. I was planning to kill all of the soldiers right from the beginning, but it would have been problematic if you didn't at least leave the buildings behind, Vandali told him. Ha ha ha. You're right about that. Vandali gave a nod as Balkus laughed. Hearing their conversation, half of the former slaves looked fearful. Your face has changed, but you're still acting like a kid as always, Oi Argy, said Gopher, showing no signs of fear. She gave a wry smile as she looked at Balkus, who had become half bone. Balkus looked at her and stopped laughing. I'm sorry for lying, he said. Are you talking about your promise to repel the Mage Shield Nation and chase them back? Asked Gopher. Nobody took that seriously. But you know, we left you guys for 200 years even after we died. It's fine. I've heard from Olivia-sama and His Majesty over here that you protected Zandia-sama and the others, and the goddess's legacy beneath the castle. That's what I was trying to do, but the reality was that Arist was all that remained of Zandia, and it hadn't been Borkus who protected the goddess's legacy, but the cursed ice that had sealed it away. It's nothing to beat yourself up over, said Gopher, giving her father a clap on his cold back. Don't be showing me that disheartened face, it's not like you. I can't introduce you to your grandchildren like this, can I? Grandchildren? Borkus repeated. Did you say grandchildren? I have grandchildren? Yeah, 3 of them, said Gopher. I can only introduce you to 2 of them, and I can't tell you who the father is, but the female slaves had been treated as playthings by the soldiers. Contraceptives were expensive in this world, they weren't things that slaves could use. That was how things were. I see. Borkus looked at Vandali. Kid. Vandali shook his head. Almost none of the spirits of those who had died in the mine were still around. In the world of Lambda, undead could appear. In a mine where slaves were worked to death one after another, a priest was present, and not only for treating the soldiers and regular workers. The priest would also purify the spirits of the dead. There were none among the spirits who called themselves Gopher's child. I see. No, it's fine, said Borkus. I'm sure they went to where the goddess is, rather than to that good-for-nothing god. I did pray a lot, after all. You're right, said Vandali. All around him, he could hear the voices of the undead titans and the slaves crying out in joy over their reunion, as well as voices of grief as they mourned over those who were no longer here. I can't kill Heinz, and I can't revive or make undead out of those who have already returned to the circle of transmigration. I'm still powerless after all, thought Vandali. Of course, Vandali wanted to change the former, but he wanted to do something about the latter as well. As these thoughts ran through his mind, he thought it was about time and gave Olivia a signal. Everyone, she said, addressing the Titans. We will return to Taylorsheim alongside His Majesty. Please decide whether you will come with us or go on a separate path. Gopher and the other refugees from Taylorsheim were relatives of Borkus, Zran and everyone else, so of course, the undead Titans wanted to take them back to Taylorsheim. However, that would mean coming to a nation where Vandali ruled as king. As such, their desires had to be confirmed as well. Taylorsheim is currently a nation of undead and ghouls ruled by His Majesty Vandali, as well as the monsters that he has tamed, Livia continued. I believe that many things will be different from how they were in the past. I, too, am considerably different from how I was when I was alive. There are also many enemies. The Hartnett Duchy would never let us be if they were to find out about us, and the Amid Empire, including the Mig Shield Nation, still desires our annihilation. There are also pure-breed vampires who worship an evil god, targeting His Majesty. And there will only be more enemies in the future. Of course, we will fight the enemies, Vandali added. Last year, we repelled the Mig Shield Nation's expedition army of 6,000. If you have any requests, I will listen to them. But that does not mean that I am capable of doing anything. Everything has its limits. If you can accept this, then please come to my nation. The current Taylorsheim had many enemies and its laws were borrowed. It was a nation full of problems. It wasn't a place that Vandali could proudly declare to be an ideal land or paradise. Things would probably be fine for a while. But one day, Taylorsheim could be attacked by those reincarnating in Lambda with full knowledge of Vandali's death attribute magic or Heinz's party who would be far stronger than they were now. One day, gods like Alder, the god of law and fate, or Yapion, the god of ice, might descend upon this world and lead an army of tens of thousands of mighty, superhuman individuals and march on Taylorsheim. That was the kind of nation that they were being told to come to, so asking them first was only natural. That was what Vandali thought. But Gopher's reply was, "What are you saying? Isn't it obvious that we're going to come with you? I'm grateful to you for saving us, and I was even able to meet Oyaji again. Also, since you had the strength to take over this mine, I'm sure things will be fine. It's not like I don't have any misgivings when you say that it's a nation of undead and monsters, but Oyaji Dono and the others haven't changed at all from when they were alive, other than their outward appearances. I believe in you. And even if we went our separate paths, there's nowhere for us to live in this duchy, no, in this kingdom." It seemed that all of the former refugees would come back to Taylorsheim. "Thank you, everyone," said Livia, looking delighted. Leaving the explanation of future plans to her, Vandali headed towards the next group. Other than the Titans, there were 2 other kinds of slaves in the mine. There was a group of criminal slaves and a group made up of the slaves who had been brought here after nobody had purchased them elsewhere, as well as those from the first cultivation village. It really was a plan to simply leave these people to fend for themselves. Should I have made the castle sink more and tilted more of an angle? Vandali wondered as he headed towards the group of criminal slaves. Their slave collars hadn't been removed and they had been restrained, just like the soldiers, and Vandali had made the doll-like soldiers watch over them. They were formerly fiendish criminals, so Vandali couldn't let down his guard. Some of them were those who had been brought to this mine only a couple of days ago. There were many who still had their willpower and stamina. You heard what I said, didn't you? Vandali asked them. Now then, I'm going to make a selection. Don't we have any right to decide? Asked a bearded slave with scars on his face. Vandali looked at those around him as he answered. You do have a right to decide, he said. But I have the right to decide whether or not to accept your decision. Even if your crimes were committed in another nation, I have no intention of welcoming evil criminals. These criminals had been exploited by the Hartner Duchy that had done horrific things to Taylorsheim, but that didn't make them good people. Vandali had no intention of bringing them to Taylorsheim unless they had some extraordinary circumstances. I see, said the bearded slave. Then I'll bid you farewell here. Won't you at least let me take some of the soldiers' equipment and the food in the dining hall as a farewell gift? Very well, said Vandali. Hanisan, he wants to bid farewell to this world. What? Shouted the slave. Wait a second, I didn't choose anything like, okay. I understand, the scarred man screamed as the flame ghost Hanu enveloped him, surrounding him in flames. Before long, he collapsed and stopped moving. All right, next person, Vandali began. Wait a second. What are you playing at? Why did you burn him to death? He didn't disobey you or demand that you give him money, right? The criminal slaves were shocked and frightened. Vandali blinked at them a few times before answering. I did say that I have the right to decide whether to accept your decision, didn't I? Based on that right, I decided that I wouldn't accept that person's decision, he said. So then, why did you kill him? I mean, if I gave a former bandit weapons and food and set him free and then he returned to being a bandit and harmed more people, I'd feel bad for his future victims. The spirits of those who had died at the mine had been purified by the priest, but the spirits haunting the criminal slaves were still there. Thus, Vandali was able to tell which of them were evil people by listening to the spirits behind them. Vandali had given up on the Hartner Duchy, but he wouldn't consider releasing evil people into the wild. And if he did let evil people go free here, they might cause trouble for the nearest place where people lived, the cultivation villages. But what if we reform after being saved by you? I haven't saved you criminal slaves, said Vandali. You're just extras that happened to come along with saving the relatives of Borkus and the others. I'm simply deciding whether to take you with me or discard you here. Vandali wasn't trying to become a protector of the weak or a liberator of slaves. His objective was only the rescue of Taylorsheim's refugees. For him, these criminal slaves were nothing more than those who happened to be involved in that process. Leaving them alive would probably cause harm, so Vandali would kill them and make use of them, along with the soldiers of the mine. All right. I'm going to follow you and do whatever you tell me. I'll definitely be useful. Then please burn to death, said Vandali. Arya-san, please go ahead. Okay, look over here, Jaiwa. Why? I mean, it would be troublesome if a serial robber, rapist and murderer were to come with me, said Vandali. The women of Taylorsheim would probably twist the necks of a sex offender with ease, but it would be bad for poor Vina and the other girls to see that. Now then, next, wait. I'm fine with being a slave. I won't ask you to set me free, but please spare me being burned to death. The third man begged, skillfully managing to press his forehead against the ground despite being bound. There were no spirits behind him. It was possible that he wasn't an evil criminal. Incidentally, under what charges were you turned into a slave? Vandali asked him. Stealing, said the man. I entered an inn to steal something and saw a valuable item and it just happened to be something belonging to someone related to a nobleman. Vandali thought that sending someone to the mines for stealing was a bit of a heavy punishment for the crime, but it was certainly possible if the person being stolen from was related to a nobleman. Then please work hard in Taylorsheim for a while, he said. But if you try steal things in Taylorsheim as well, things will go horribly for you. Vandali would have him work in Taylorsheim for a year, and if there were no problems, he would be set free. The noblemen of the Hartner Duchy weren't noblemen of Taylorsheim, so things would probably be fine like that. Yes, he here? I shall do my best to serve you in humility. Vandali gave a nod towards the man who had skillfully managed to fall prostrate while bound, delighted that he wouldn't have to die. And then Vandali shifted his gaze to the next criminal slave. I don't want to follow you, you creepy corpse user. So if you're going to kill me, do it with your own hands rather than dirtying the hands of your subordinates. Eh? What's wrong? You can't do it after all. Oi, you titans. Even if you follow this guy, he's just going to work you to death. So come with us and, what are you? The man began choking. Vandali used both hands to grab the head of the man who had tried to stir up the titans, used surpass limits and twisted it 180 degrees, destroying his cervical vertebrae. I didn't want to kill with my own hands because I won't get experience points that way, Vandali thought with a sigh as he looked down at the man's face and back before throwing him aside. Now then, next, after that, the criminal slaves, having learned from these examples, seemed to have decided that being taken away and remaining as slaves was the best option for them. Of course, even then, Vandali disposed of those who were evil people. The former slave titans watched with stiff expressions as Vandali, having finished making a selection of the criminal slaves, headed towards the former inhabitants of the first cultivation village. Just as he appears, he's not normal. Seeing Vandali burn people alive and twist someone's neck with his own hands without a single change in his facial expression, they made changes to their impressions of him. I didn't really think of him as a liberator of slaves or anything like that, but Gopher murmured. Really? He was actually considerate enough to make it less frightening for us, said Borkus. He was? Yeah, the reason he twisted that guy's neck earlier was so that he wouldn't show you guys the blood. Then I'd like him to do something about the smell, too. Of course, the smell of the burnt flesh of the criminal slaves was floating about. The titans were quite far away, so it was bearable, however. You're right, it's starting to make me hungry, said Borkus. Gopher almost responded to her father's remark with, exactly, but managed to stop herself and stiffened. She did a double take as she looked at Borkus's face before looking towards Livia. Livia looked up, as if wondering what was wrong. Gopher then realized that Borkus and Livia had changed more since they were alive than she had previously thought. I suppose I have no choice but to just think of Oyaji and Livia-sama having been reborn as slightly different races and get used to it, she told herself. But you really give birth to a crazy son. Are you talking to me? Eleanor blinked as she turned around after Gopher's sudden remark, which had been directed at her. Yeah, you're His Majesty's mother, aren't you? Said Gopher. Vampires really do look young, I'm jealous. No. Having realized that she had been mistaken for Vandali's mother because he was a damper and she was a vampire, Eleonora was indignant in her denial. I am Vandali-sama's servant, his mother is Dasa-sama. I want to eat some barbecued meat, Vandali thought as he finished talking to everyone from the first cultivation village, his hunger having been stimulated by the pleasant smell of burning flesh. They were quite fearful of Vandali, but in the end, they had decided to come to Talersheim. Even if they stayed in the Hartner Duchy, there was nowhere for them to live. If they were caught, they would be executed at worst or become slaves again at best. It would be a long journey if they wanted to escape to another duchy. Thus, following Vandali would give them the greatest chances of survival. I don't mind remaining as a slave, but if you could treat us a little better than we have been treated up until now. Oh no, we will welcome you as normal people, as free citizens, Vandali promised. Since you're not criminals, I have no reason to turn you into slaves. The young man who called himself the village chief's son had become completely used to serving others after living as a slave, but Vandali stopped him from lowering his head. Eleonora, having cleared up the misunderstanding about the matter of Vandali's mother, whispered in Vandali's ear. Are you sure you wish to bring them with us just as they are? She asked. They may betray you in the future, Vandali-sama. There was no way for Vandali to restrain the actions of those from the first cultivation village. Although Vandali had the ability to remove slave collars, he had no way to create new ones. Even if they were former inhabitants of the Sauron Duchy and followers of Veda's religion, there was no guarantee that they would remain loyal to Vandali. Death attribute charm didn't work on them, after all. Perhaps you should use mental encroachment to restrain them a little, Eleonora suggested. No, I don't have to go that far, said Vandali. Talersheim is a nation, not a secret society. He had no intention of demanding such loyalty from them. But if they betrayed you in the future, they might betray me in the future. That's how people are, said Vandali. I am the king, and they are merely citizens. With that being the case, that's how things are. Vandali felt that it would be abnormal to use brainwashing to restrain the wills of ordinary people who weren't criminals. And if their families were taken hostage or they were promised great rewards, they could waver and betray him. That was how normal people were. Leaving aside whether these people would really betray him, if they really did, Vandali would deal with it when the time came on a case-by-case basis. But Eleonora didn't seem satisfied, so he continued. And you haven't betrayed me, have you, Eleonora? So it's fine, he said. Eleonora's face lit up, almost audibly. And then she embraced Vandali in her arms. Vandali-sama, I will never let you go, she declared. The speed at which you hug me is steadily increasing. Being surrounded in softness that had a warmth unlike Rita and Saria's, Vandali was surprised at the fact that Eleonora's movements had no signs of hesitation or wasteful motions. He was already a user of the unarmed fighting technique at such a level that he would be considered a master on Earth, but he hadn't been able to see Eleonora's movement at all. Even now, her grip was superb, ensuring that Vandali couldn't slip out of it. It was a sight to behold. As Vandali couldn't slip out, he asked her to carry him to the final group of slaves. These were the slaves who had failed to sell or brought here immediately after the slave trader decided that they wouldn't sell anywhere else. Many of them were girls so young that even brothels wouldn't willingly buy them, and young boys who would take too long to grow enough to become useful for manual labor. They were slaves with large scars and damage to their bodies. Their eyes were all dead-looking, and their faces were blank, as if their minds weren't thinking of anything at all. Normally, it would be good to confirm what the slaves wanted. Even if their ability to think and decide for themselves had weakened, it would be best to stimulate that ability and prompt them to make a recovery and make a decision of their own will. However, the slaves all stared at Vandali as he approached. They exhaled, groaned and looked up at him as if they were longing for him. It seemed that death attribute charm was working on them. If there is anything you want to do, anywhere you want to return to, anyone you want to kill, please tell me and I'll think about how to proceed with those, said Vandali. If there aren't, then please follow me. Accept what I give you, do what I tell you to do and do as you wish once you become stronger. As long as death attribute charm was working, confirming what they desired wouldn't work properly. That was why Vandali had made it appear as if he were asking them, but then given them an order. Once their bodies and minds recovered and they learned to read, write and do arithmetic, they would become able to think for themselves even if they remained under the skill's effects. Yes, I understand. Gosujin-sama, the slaves, who were even more lifeless than the doll-like soldiers, nodded. Vandali would need to heal their wounds and make sure they ate properly before they moved from the mine. Before that, the problem was dealing with one final person. So, why are you here? Vandali asked. There was a man lying on the ground, his hands and feet bound. Vandali looked at this man through half-closed eyes, at Luciliano, the degenerate. Chapter 84, Mountains don't move so they're simpler than people. The Knight Karkan, who had managed to successfully repel the sudden monster rampage before the city suffered any damage, was in a peculiar predicament. Why was there a monster rampage and the appearance of a new dungeon at a time like this? He wondered. Some of the company that he led were heavily wounded, but fortunately, none of them had died. The lord of the region, Viscount Niaki, had also thanked him. However, many of the achievements had gone to the blue-flamed sword Heinz, the one who was rumored to likely become the Orborm Kingdom's second S-class adventurer. The monsters had chanted, "Kill Heinz," as if it were an incantation and all aimed for him, after all. With that being the case, Heinz might have been blamed for being the man who had summoned the monsters and brought a disaster to the city, but he had already gained a good reputation and was adored by many. Rather than being blamed, his reputation has only improved for being the champion who faced the large pack of monsters without running away. The people were also praising the fact that Heinz had been targeted by the monsters, saying that this must be a sign that the evil gods who were surviving servants of the Demon King were after him. In other words, Heinz was a hero who was feared even by the gods. As it was Heinz and the other members of the Five-Colored Blades who had defeated most of the monsters, it was only natural that they received praise. With that being the case, one might wonder why the adventurers and Karkan's men had participated in the defense, but that would only be in hindsight. There had been no proof that the monsters would actually only aim for Heinz. Even if there was no way that they would have been able to say, well then, it has nothing to do with us, and look unconcerned. And so, Karkan's company had exhausted themselves in a fierce battle. Heinz and his party were now clearing the ominous dungeon that had been discovered in the forest near the city. and Kakan had been told that the next expedition for his company wasn't necessary. In fact, it's true that it's not the time to be doing things like an expedition. The men of the company are being completely healed by Froto's healing magic, but they're not in a state where they are able to move around so easily. The source of this monster rampage was almost certainly the newly formed dungeon, but it still wasn't completely certain. Until Heinz and his party returned, Kakan and his men, who had been assigned to be part of the city's defenses, couldn't move. Even after Heinz and his party returned, it would take time to set up a system to control and watch over the dungeon. Kakan didn't have any obligation to cooperate in this, but if he flatly ignored the expectations of Viscount Niaki who was relying on him, his social position would be jeopardized. But with that said, that didn't mean that Kakan would necessarily be valued highly even if he did meet the Viscount's expectations. After all, the cultivation project to the south that he was supposed to be in charge of had been left alone. The earliest he'll be able to move is winter Kakan's side. He had lost count of how many times he had done so. The city of Niaki still hadn't received news that the Duke's castle built by Ninarode had sunk, or the scandal that had shaken the Orborn kingdom, or that the guild master of the Mages Guild as well as several noblemen had been revealed to have connections with vampires. Luciliano, the degenerate. He was a human-class adventurer, and when he first encountered Vandali, he had been working in the Migshield nation. He had created a live-dead out of the woman who had become Porvina and used it as a familiar to infiltrate the village of the noble orc Bgogan in order to gather information. And after the battle between the ghouls and orcs finished, he had encountered Vandali through the live-dead, but, so that's what this person's face looked like. I guess I really do get a different impression now that I can see his physical body, Vandali thought. Back then, when he was still 3 years old, he hadn't known what Luciliano's face looked like. Even if he did, Luciliano now had hollow cheeks and a freely growing beard. If Gopher and the others hadn't told him that there was a former human adventurer among the slaves, he wouldn't have noticed Luciliano at all. "So, why are you here?" Vandali asked one more time, as Luciliano hadn't answered him the first time, but there was still no response. Rather than deliberately staying silent, it seemed that he had fainted. Eleonora quietly raised her foot. "Eleonora, he looks like he will break if you step on him, so let's not do that," said Vandali. "Yes, Vandali-sama." Still being held in Eleonora's arms, Vandali secreted some restorative medicine from his claws and used telekinesis to apply it to Luciliano's face. The moment he did so, Luciliano sprang up like a spring-loaded toy, but he was still bound, so he lost his balance and fell to the ground once more. "Kaha? Ha. Wait, please don't kill me. Even if you do kill me, please let me die in comfort. Also, let me have one final meal." "You're looking unexpectedly lively," said Vandali. "To start off with, judging from your behavior, it seems that you remember who I am. There's no way I could forget someone of a rare race like a damp. But wait, it wasn't my intention to encounter you here." Luciliano begged. "No, I'd be pretty surprised if it was," said Vandali. It seemed that Luciliano remembered exactly who Vandali was, including the fact that Vandali had threatened him with, "The next time I see you, I will kill you." "Vandali-sama is asking what you are doing in a place like this." "Answer him," Eleonora said, prompting Luciliano to provide a response. "Also, I am not Vandali-sama's mother, but his servant," she added, as multiple people had now made the same misunderstanding. "All right, I'll answer," said Luciliano. "After that incident, I took my money, left Balchberg and migrated to the Orborn Kingdom. I continued my research into undead while working as an adventurer. But one day, unfortunately, according to Luciliano's story, he had gotten caught up in the dispute between Lord Belton and Lord Lucas. The third son of a certain nobleman in Belton's faction plotted to have his father change sides to Lucas's faction and name the third son as his successor. By having his father assassinated and turning him into a live-dead puppet, he set his eyes on Luciliano, an adventurer working solo without forming a party or finding companions, to create the live-dead. Of course, Luciliano didn't want to get involved in such a conspiracy, but he was kidnapped and threatened without being given a choice, so he pretended to do what was being demanded of him. But he secretly used a live-dead mouse as his familiar to find help, and the third son's conspiracy was stopped before it began and those involved were arrested. But I was arrested as well, Luciliano explained. That noble family seemed to want to make it as if the incident had never happened. I was taken straight into imprisonment and then sent here as a criminal slave. Thanks to the slave collar, I can't use magic. Well, Even then, my attribute values are higher than the average person, so I managed to survive up until now, but I suppose that ends here. I wanted to at least have some mellow wine, warm soup, fresh salad, soft bread, a fish dish with fresh fish, a meat dish with thick chunks of meat and a dessert before the end. Isn't that a full-course meal? Vandali pointed out. Luciliano's oval-shaped face had grown thin, making him look even seedier, but his request was quite extravagant. It was possible that he could get along with Vandali unexpectedly well. So, Vandali-sama, are you going to kill him? Eleonora asked. What should I do? Vandali wondered, looking troubled. Luciliano was a man with quite a peculiar relationship to Vandali. He wasn't an ally, so there wasn't any reason for Vandali to assertively help him. If he had to decide, he was more of an enemy. But Vandali couldn't answer whether he was someone worth killing in this situation. For Porvina, who wasn't present, Luciliano was the man who had manipulated her previous life's body without permission and turned it into a noble orc's plaything, but he wasn't directly responsible for her death, and Porvina hadn't shown any signs of hating him after being reborn. In fact, hadn't she forgotten about it? But if Vandali let him go here, there was a high chance that information on what had happened in this mine would leak. However, Vandali felt reluctant to kill him. Unlike the criminal slaves who had been evil criminals, Luciliano wasn't an evil person, nor did Vandali harbor any personal grudges towards him. Considering the details of how he became a slave, Vandali actually felt a considerable amount of sympathy for him. I suppose I'll try asking Porvina first, Vandali decided. He would reserve judgment for now until asking Porvina whether it was alright for him to bring Luciliano back to Talersheim. After that, Vandali woke up the noblemen and soldiers in the mine and gathered them in one place. It's alright if their limbs fall off or their heads smashed to pieces, but please try not to crush them all over. But it's totally okay to turn them into paste, he said. His dangerous-sounding words were directed not at the conscious yet paralyzed individuals behind him, but the new inhabitants of Talersheim, who were breathing loudly through their noses with clubs, shovels and pickaxes in their hands. You bastard! What are you planning to do? Demanded one particularly large voice among the countless pleas for mercy. A public execution, Vandali replied. Don't, censored, with me. The voice shouted back. Vandali found this rather unpleasant. However, these would be the final words of the people who were about to be executed in a gruesome way. It would be immature to think of them badly for shouting at me, Vandali thought as he turned around. I am Viscount Besser, the one who has been entrusted with the management of this mine by His Excellency, the Duke. I firmly protest to this unjust treatment, shouted the Viscount, his mouth opened so wide that it looked as if his entire face consisted of only a mouth. Vandali gave him a perplexed look. Unjust treatment, you say? Isn't this normal? The Viscount and his soldiers had done things that Vandali would hesitate to even say aloud. The positions had simply been reversed now, so this was normal, wasn't it? In fact, they would die within 10 minutes without being subjected to the same treatment, so weren't they actually lucky? Do not fool yourself. I am a nobleman. The Viscount exclaimed. I mean, I know that. Is that relevant? Vandali asked. He had explained the situation to the Viscount and his men. He had the feeling that doing this instead of killing them without them knowing anything would allow him to turn them into stronger undead. You bastard. Even in war, it is common sense to take noblemen as prisoners whenever possible and give them treatment appropriate to their status. Are you not even aware of this? Shouted the Viscount. No, I wasn't. Sorry. Vandali, having learned something new, made a mental note of the Viscount's words. If he became an adventurer, he might have opportunities to participate in wars, so it was good that he could learn this piece of common knowledge early on. I'll do that next time, he said. No, do it now. The Viscount demanded. Do you think that you can get away with killing me? I think I'll make sure that I will, said Vandali. There is no way that you could. I am a nobleman. If you do such a thing, all of you low-birth creatures will be sentenced to death. My kingdom will put its prestige on the line to hunt down those who kill noblemen and end their lives without mercy. Viscount Besser shouted. The faces of some of the former slave titans turned pale in fear at his words. They began lowering the weapons in their hands. That was how much of a difference there was between commoners and noblemen in the world of Lambda. Not everyone's lives were equal. The lives of nobles and royalty were clearly more precious. That was common knowledge. Do you understand now, you vulgar brat? Viscount Besser shouted at Vandali, the current king of Talersheim. At this moment, a rising bloodthirst was coming from Borkus and Eleonora, but Vandali raised a hand to calm them. The important thing here wasn't to deal with the fact that he had been insulted by the Viscount, but to make the new citizens of Taylorsheim acknowledge his power. If he relied too much on Borkus and the others, some might change their minds and decide that they couldn't follow him after all. And if the criminal slaves didn't take him seriously, that would cause problems later on in the future. "Everyone, please come over here," said Vandali. Okay, thinking that he should show his power, Vandali summoned Livia and the other ghosts, and transferred mana to them. He looked up at the mine, a small mountain that was protruding from the surface of the earth, the small mountain that was about 500 meters tall. Corpse flame prison destruction barrage. Small flames appeared, like a countless number of fireflies. But in the next moment, they turned into a countless number of skulls made of black flames. The skulls cackled as they flooded towards the mountain that Vandali was pointing at. The resulting sight was fearsome to behold. Over 100 skull-shaped flames sank their teeth into the rocky mountain. The hard boulders became brittle and broke, burned and crumbled. This process continued endlessly, and before everyone's very eyes, the mountain's shape changed as it was gouged from the earth. There was a thunderous noise as rocks fell from the mountain, but even that was erased by Vandali's magic. "Kid, the mountain's going to disappear," said Borkus. "Ah, you're right." By the time Borkus stopped him, the mountain had been reduced to 2/3 of its size. It wasn't that large a mountain to begin with, but this display of power made not only the previously spirited Viscount and his soldiers, but even the former slaves stare with open mouths. Eleonora and the others were dumbfounded as well. Even Pete, whose head was protruding from Vandali's hair, had frozen stiff. Up until now, none of the spells of the death attribute had possessed the ability to physically destroy their targets. However, by acquiring the dead spirit magic skill and having Livia and the others available to use, Vandali could now accomplish the same things as fire attribute magic. Eleonora and everyone else was seeing Vandali's mana exhibit its true potential for the first time. "Botjan, would it not be quicker to simply invade the Hartner Duchy?" Sam suggested. "Sam, it's impossible because Heinz is here," said Vandali. "Also, if I do that, that would mean fighting the other duchies and even the Amid Empire, wouldn't it?" "Well, I suppose so," said Borkus. "No matter how strong the kid is, he's just one person. If A-class adventurers and elite forces from every nation attacked multiple places at once, holding out would be impossible." As he said, there were plenty of people in this world who were capable of doing what Vandali had just accomplished. "And in the end, a mountain is just a mountain," said Vandali. "It doesn't move. A B-class or A-class adventurer would be able to avoid this attack. Unlike mountains, people could be equipped with all kinds of magic items and possessed skills. Corpse flame prison destruction barrage wasn't accurate in its targeting, so it wouldn't be difficult for a superhuman to survive it, though ordinary people would simply turn into ash. It's true that things would probably work out with me, Vigoro, Eleonora Joutchen and the others, but Borkus looked up at the collapsed mountain. Normally, they might have had to run away from the falling debris, but Vandali had even destroyed the debris. He had even erased the noise, which made it feel less real, but if he hadn't done that, then many people probably would have lost consciousness. "By the way, was it really alright to destroy the mine?" asked Borkus. "It's not a problem," Vandali replied. "I intended to destroy the mine right from the beginning to eradicate the Hartner Duchy's supply of mineral resources." He turned around to face the former slaves. "What I want to say is, I have power, so the nobleman's retaliation isn't something to be feared. Don't you agree?" he asked them. The former slaves remained dumbfounded for a moment before regaining their senses. "I've never seen such a great spell. This is the one who's going to be our king? If our king is this strong, then isn't it true that we don't need to fear the noblemen of this nation?" "That's right, even if the Hartner Duchy and other duchies, even if the king sent an army, they'll be eaten up like that mountain and not even leave ashes behind. If that person is our king, then we won't even lose to the Amid Empire. We won't be chased out of our homeland anymore." Strength returned to their eyes, and the weapons that had been lowered earlier were raised once more. In fact, it was the Viscount and his men who were now deathly pale. After seeing Vandali's dead spirit magic, they were now perfectly aware as to whether the Hartner family they knew would be able to do something about the half-vampire before them who called himself a king. "Wait. If you spare us, no, at least me, I'll pay you any amount you want," said the Viscount. His plea for mercy triggered the soldiers to beg for mercy as well. "The Viscount Sama? I have a wife and children, please spare my life. I haven't killed or raped anyone. It's true, Please believe me. I can earn money in other ways, so I don't really care about that, said Vandali. Raping others when you have a wife and child isn't good now, is it? And you, the last one, you shouldn't tell lies that are so easy to see through. All of the soldiers' attempts were futile. I've already left out those of you who were simply working normally without unnecessarily harming, killing or raping the slaves, Vandali told them. Those whom he had deemed to be not bad enough to deserve death had been gathered in a separate place. There was an old soldier who had remained faithful to his wife and employees brought here by the viscounts such as maids and chefs, around 10 people in total. They weren't particularly virtuous people, nor had they harbored deep compassion for the slaves, but they had hesitated to kill. Vandali was planning to bring them back to Taylorsheim as slaves, watch them for a while and then, if they seemed alright, he would release them to become free citizens. He loathed meaningless killing, he wouldn't think of killing them unless it was necessary. The incident where he had a single silver coin stolen from him in the marketplace hadn't even stayed in his memories. But when there was a reason to kill someone, he believed that they should always be killed. The Viscount and his men were those who deserved to die. Now then, as part of my duty as the Eclipse King of Taylorsheim, I will carry out your sentence, Vandali declared. The war cry of Gopher and the rest of the Titans, who were armed with the weapons that they had chosen, combined with the screams of the Viscount and his men in a pleasant-sounding chorus. The screams grew gradually quieter, but the pleasant sensation and sounds of flesh being crushed and bones being broken soothed Vandali's heart, and the thick smell of blood stimulated his hunger. Now then, shall we leave this place to Princess Livia and the others while we get ready to eat? I'm sure everyone wants to fill their stomachs up, said Vandali. I'm sure that Saria and the others have finished preparations in the kitchen. By the way, what are they making? Livia asked. In the kitchen, there were food supplies that had been supplied by the traveling merchant. The slaves had been forced to eat food similar to what would normally be fed to livestock or turnip-like crops that would grow even in dry land, which they had grown in the slave village. But today, Vandali intended to prepare food for them made from the ingredients that the soldiers had been eating. Vandali and the others found these ingredients rather strange, however. Sam and the others brought other ingredients here for us, so let's use those as well to make a stew, said Vandali. Oh, miso stew? That's good stuff, said Borkus. There were no dairy products available, so the stew would contain miso to provide a deeper flavor. It was a fine example of a homemade Taylorsheim dish. If there was fresh, undried meat, I would have considered a barbecue as well, said Vandali. Vandali-sama, I have to question that sentiment, said Eleonora. It seemed that she was the only one to have noticed that eating barbecued meat would be difficult after seeing the burnt corpses. The levels of the dead spirit magic and commanding skills have increased. Please allow me to call you master. No. Having seen the dead spirit magic, Luciliano begged Vandali to accept him as an apprentice. Vandali wondered what Luciliano had in mind. He doubted that he had any techniques that he could teach Luciliano. I don't mind remaining a slave, said Luciliano. Please teach me your supreme techniques. He is quite the promising man, said Eleonora. She seemed to have taken a liking to Luciliano. The way he gazed at Vandali as if worshipping him. Well, teaching others rather than being taught will be a good experience as well, said Borkus. I don't think he'll be able to do the same things as you, though, kid. He'll have different magical affinities. Poor Vina-chan has forgotten about it and doesn't mind, so isn't it fine? Said Rita. We'll have another civil official, at least. Well then I will teach you, but what I'm using isn't life attribute magic, so you shouldn't get your hopes up, said Vandali. I would be more surprised if you were to tell me that it was the same attribute of magic as mine, said Luciliano. It seemed that Corpse Flame Prison Destruction Barrage couldn't be mistaken for life attribute magic. In any case, Vandali now had a new apprentice. After that, Vandali and the others stayed for 2 days in what was now formerly slave-run mine. In fact, the underground tunnel had now collapsed and turned into a graveyard. During that time, they made various preparations, had Gopher and the other titans gather some stamina and spirit, and Vandali performed physical examinations on them. As they had spent long years being exploited as slaves, there were some who didn't have the strength to make the journey to Taylorsheim. They would certainly be over the limit for Vandali to fly them there. As a result, Vandali needed to create carriages and horse-shaped golems, similar to the clay horses in textbooks on Earth, with golem transmutation. Carriages in Lambda don't have suspension, do they? Said Vandali. Sam doesn't have them either, though he doesn't shake because of his skill. Botchan, why are you talking about pensions? Asked Rita. Naturally, springs and coils hadn't been invented in Lambda. Boards and bowls were put together in a structure to reduce shock, but metal springs didn't exist. So Vandali created them and added them to his carriages. He would be able to test the idea that he had thought of right away, so his golem transmutation and carpentry skills were celebrating. You possess the technique of a carriage craftsman, Your Majesty. But still, the world's technology has progressed from where it was 200 years ago when we were alive, Livio remarked. No, Livia-sama, this is something that the kid's invented himself, Balkus told her. In truth, however, Vandali hadn't actually invented springs. He had simply reused his knowledge from Earth and Origin to reproduce them. You can praise me more, said Vandali. He was happy to be praised, so he showed no modesty. Although he was using his prior knowledge, it was his own skills and magic that were reproducing the technology, so Vandali considered it to be his own achievement. Patents on Earth and in Origin meant nothing in Lambda, anyway. It would be perfect with some golem tires, but were those made just by hardening some rubber? Vandali wondered. Tires would be convenient in various ways, so he would try making them when he got back. And so, Vandali reversed the Titans' aging while telling them that he was performing physical examinations. They had wasted 200 years of their lives. This was a service he was doing them so that they could live enough to make up for that. Vandali had gained their permission, albeit in an indirect way, so it was probably fine. This massage, do people ever tell you that they feel younger afterwards? I feel 100 years younger, seriously. Things were going like this. Vandali couldn't complete the task for all of them in 2 days, so he was planning to do the rest along the way. This also acted as training to his mana pool, so it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And then he used the monster bones that Balkus and the others had brought to create decoy undead. I have a complete understanding of Titan and human skeletons. Using golem transmutation to change the shapes of monster bones to disguise them as Titan skeletons is simply a little heavy labor for me, Vandali explained. It's heavy work. I have to make a lot of them, so it's just troublesome. Incidentally, Vandali had used decomposition on the gruesome corpses of the Viscount and his men to make them rot away, put their broken bones back together and created skeletons. With this, even if the people of the Hartner Duchy noticed that something strange had occurred at the mine, they would simply assume that someone had killed everyone here and that all of the soldiers and slaves had turned into skeletons. They wouldn't think that the slaves had been rescued. After finishing all preparations, everyone headed towards Talersheim. You have acquired the title Holy Son of Vida. The level of the carpentry skill has increased. Name, Eleonora, rank, 9 race, noble-born vampire Viscount level, 47 job, subordinate war princess job level, 27 job history, slave, servant, apprentice mage, apprentice warrior, mage, demon user, vassal warrior age, 10 years old. 20 years old at time of vampire transformation, 30 years old in total passive skills, self-enhancement, subordination, level 6, level up. Superhuman strength, level 6 rapid regeneration, level 4, level up. Status effect resistance, level 6 intuition, level 4, level up. Mental corruption, level 3 automatic mana recovery, level 5, level up. Detect presence, level 4, level up. Sunlight resistance, level 4, level up. Allure, level 1, new. Active skills, mining, level 1 time attribute magic, level 5 life attribute magic, level 5 no attribute magic, level 2 mana control, level 3 blood sucking, level 4, new. Swordsmanship, level 4, level up. Unarmed fighting technique, level 3, level up. Silent steps, level 4 steel, level 1 housework, level 3, level up. Shield technique, level 3, level up. Armor technique, level 3, level up. Surpass limits, level 3, level up. Chant revocation, level 2, level up. Unique skills, charming demon eyes, level 7. Job explanation, subordinate war princess, a job that can be acquired by a woman who has been born into nobility or previously held a certain social status, but is currently a subordinate to another person. Depending on the nation, owning female warriors with this job is a large symbol of status. It is not uncommon for nobles and royalty to trade them at high prices. Many harems contain multiple female slaves who possess, or forced to possess, this job and act as guards. This job does provide bonuses to combat-related skills, But it also provides bonuses to the allure, seduction and lovemaking skills. In Eleonora's case, the prerequisite of being born into nobility is fulfilled by the fact that she is a noble-born vampire. Chapter 85, A King Who Visits the People. Korf, who managed the caravan of merchants who delivered materials to the slave-run mine, felt a strange uneasiness. There had been all kinds of things happening in the Hartner Duchy recently. First, a dungeon had appeared at the city of Niaki and a monster rampage had occurred, causing a great deal of panic. The monster rampage and the dungeon, named Heinz's Skeleton Cavern, had been dealt with by the A-class adventurer party, the Five Colored Blades. After the dungeon was explored, it was declared to be a class dungeon with 30 floors and that monsters shouldn't emerge from within as long as the monster population inside was periodically kept in check. Apparently, there were many undead, venomous insectoid monsters and poisonous plant-type monsters. Most of the floors were caves, swamps or forests. During the monster rampage, all of the monsters had been more powerful than their ranks, but the monsters had now returned to normal strength. But it seemed that when the blue-flamed sword Heinz entered the dungeon, the monsters would flood towards him. This was a chance for the city of Niaki, especially the Adventurers Guild, as only small to medium-sized devil's nests and D-class dungeons had existed nearby until now. The monsters that appeared in the new dungeon were unique, so the dungeon wouldn't be very popular, however. The merchants of the caravan anticipated that new, rare drugs could be created from the monster's venom. They didn't care about the rumors that the remnants of the Demon King had created a dungeon in order to kill the heroes of the Five Colored Blades, particularly targeting its leader Heinz. It was nothing more than a topic of idle conversation. After that, the castle in Nineland, the Hartner Duchy's capital, had sunk. Not in the metaphorical, economic sense, but physically. The merchants hadn't seen it for themselves, so they found it difficult to believe, but it was certain that the castle had suffered large damage. An outlaw who had gone on a violent rampage in the north was apparently involved in the incident, but the smaller details hadn't been released yet. Either way, the merchants had thought that this event had no direct effect on them, as they operated in remote regions. They only hoped that taxes wouldn't increase to fund the castle's repair. But after leaving the city of Niaki, staying a night in a cultivation village and then heading further south to the slave-run mine, they realized that this wasn't the case. "Boss, no matter how many times I count, there's a mountain missing." "I see, so you thought so as well." After they left the cultivation village, they drew closer to the slave-run mountain that was their destination over the first and second day, giving them a view of the Rocky Mountains lined up against each other, but the scenery that they had seen countless times was now different. There was one less mountain than there should have been. What is the meaning of this? Was there a great earthquake or something? If there was an earthquake large enough to collapse a mountain, even the city of Niaki wouldn't be unharmed. The people at the cultivation villages would have known something, too. And if that really were the case, the other mountains would have crumbled as well. So, are you saying that the tunnels collapsed, causing the whole mountain to collapse? There's no doubt that some fearsome monster has appeared. I'm sure it was the same demon that sank the castle. We agreed that that was a false rumor, right? Calm down. Stay calm. We always say that if you panic, you'll only cause yourself harm, don't we? Shouted the caravan leader Korf, reprimanding his subordinate merchants. But he was aware that this was a state of emergency. With that said, that didn't mean that they could simply turn around and return to the city. "Everyone, keep your weapons in hand," Korf ordered. "Escorts, please be ready to fight at any time." "We're going to keep going?" "Of course," said Korf. "How can we run away without knowing what happened? We're merchants." It was certainly an emergency situation, but there wasn't any threat or danger that they could see yet. They couldn't hear any volcanoes erupting or fearsome monsters howling. If the caravan turned back now, they would be breaching their contract. Their carriages contained the food supplies and other necessities, as well as luxury items, for the slave-run mine. If some kind of disaster had occurred at the slave-run mountain and the survivors were waiting for rescue, they might all die if the caravan fled without even investigating the scene. Never mind being charged a fine. In the worst-case scenario, Korf's head could be sent flying, physically. Even if that didn't happen, cowards who would say, "Something appeared to be happening, so we got scared and turned back," didn't have the right to form a caravan operating in remote regions. That was why Korf's caravan needed to confirm what had happened at the slave-run mine. In this world, merchants couldn't survive just by counting revenues and expenditures. They needed to risk their lives to gain the trust of others. On the third day, they saw that the outer wall and gate of the slave-run mine had collapsed and been destroyed. However, there wasn't any sign of vicious monsters or armed forces occupying the mine. With that being the case, it was unlikely that the caravan would suddenly be wiped out. Believing this, they cautiously drew closer, and the men of Korf's caravan saw something terrifying. Skeletons. The soldiers know. The slaves have all turned into skeletons. Monsters made only of white bones. Their bones rattling with each movement and their jaws clattering in place of laughter. There were skeletons equipped with the armor and weapons of the soldiers, as well as titan skeletons over 2 meters tall wearing worn-out pieces of cloth instead of clothes, with pickaxes and shovels in their hands. It looked like there were hundreds of them. Run back to the city. We have to tell the people in the city about this. There probably weren't any survivors. Even if there were, this was too much for Korf's caravan to do anything about it. Having decided this, they fled back to the city of Niaki with the news that the mine had vanished and that the soldiers and slaves had turned into skeletons. And so, news of a third large incident spread, sending shockwaves throughout the Hartner Duchy. One of the members of the 5 Colored Blades, Edgar, noticed that the higher-ranking members of the Fangs of Dark Knights had been replaced by undead, and through the party's efforts, a vampire zombie was exterminated. After that, they headed for Nineland by joint request of the Hartner family and the Church of Alder. Around the same time, Vandali and those accompanying him arrived back in Talersheim and were now resting. Holy Son, congratulations on the fulfillment of the prophecy. Please grant us permission to build a new statue of you. New Arzu exclaimed, worshipping Vandali as if he were a god walking on this world now that he had gained the title of Holy Son of Vida. Your Majesty, now that you are ruling over new citizens, there has never been a better opportunity to create our own currency, said Ches Heir, insistent now that the nation had gained hundreds of new citizens. Vandali, I told you through the communication devices as well, but there's a new dungeon. When are we going to clear it? Asked Vigoro, excited about the upcoming new adventure. The 3 of them were all talking to Vandali at once in the castle, but he didn't have the ability to answer them right now. It's been quite a while since I felt this smooth, cool sensation of patting him, Bazdia remarked. You are absolutely right, Terra agreed. By the way, won't you people hold back a little? If you don't, it will feel like I am embracing you. If you feel that way, lose some of your meat, said Zadyrus. Not only your upper arms, but you must get rid of some of your fat as well. Right, boy? Wow, King's tongue can grow so long. Look, Mama, it's like an earthworm, exclaimed Varby. You're right, it's longer than you are, Varby, said Bilder. King, what's the inside of your mouth like? There were clicking noises. Huh? This isn't his tongue, but a centipede-san? Rapisage groaned. Your tongue won't grow, Bilder told her. It won't grow, will it? All of the women had flooded towards Vandali. For the men, the only parts of Vandali visible between all of the women who were engaging in physical contact with Vandali for the first time in a month were his limbs and his tongue. I did hear about it, but he really is popular with the women, Livia remarked in a surprised tone. That's right, it is Vandali-sama, after all, said Eleonora. Rita giggled. Are you surprised? She and Eleonora seemed to be boasting, for some reason. Hey, why are you boasting, Eleonora? Rita? Shouldn't your reaction be a little different here? Asked Saria. But she couldn't stop Bazdia and the others from doing what they were doing. She had done the same thing as them. Incidentally, Balkus was leading Gopher and the other titans around the city, and for some reason, Sam was practicing flying through the sky. It seemed that he had been provoked by the fact that Vandali had become able to turn into an enormous bird and fly through the sky, but would a carriage really become able to fly through practice? Isn't it about time you all calmed down? Asked Vandali, surrounded by warm, soft, pleasant-smelling skin. And my tongue won't grow any longer, so stop pulling it. Everyone wasn't so assertive before. And there were times where you wouldn't see me for days at a time, weren't there? He pointed out. Nobody would see him for days while he was clearing dungeons other than those in his party. But nobody had embraced him so passionately when he returned to Talersheim on those occasions. It is as you say, boy. But things have been difficult for the past little while, said Zadyrus. Well, we didn't really mind half of the undead titans all leaving Talersheim at once, however, she added. Yeah. The walls you built are solid, Van, and normally, we would be clearing the dungeons and hunting monsters in the nearby devil's nests, so the monsters were being kept in check sufficiently, said Bazdia. But, making preparations to accommodate the new citizens and welcome everyone coming back has been difficult, said Terra. In particular, teaching the other ghouls about the marriage system and making them understand it. Yes, it's been truly difficult, said Kuka. All of us former humans were lecturing them for a whole day. They didn't object to what we were saying, it simply took a long time to make them understand. The biggest concern that they had about welcoming Gopher and the other new inhabitants was the way ghouls conducted their sexual relationships. Ghouls had no culture regarding marriage, so it was possible that they would cause trouble by calling out to others who already had children and spouses. The magic items that Vandali had distributed had improved the ghouls' fertility, and their everyday lives had become more stable recently, so their nights were less wild than before. They weren't simply looking for whichever partners might be available. Ghouls had their preferences, too. Also, Vandali as well as New Aza and the other titans had long since explained to the ghouls how relationships between men and women worked in the societies of other races. Because of this, the ghouls had acknowledged marriage as a situation where one worked intimately with their partner in order to bear and raise their children. But there were still occasions where they would call out to each other and say, "I don't have a partner right now, so do you want to?" If a child was born, they would say things like, "All right, I'll help you," until they become adults, so the men weren't completely irresponsible, but only if this happened between individuals who both had long lifespans. If their partners had a proper view on marriage, there could be complications with jealousy and even bloodshed could occur. That was why the ghoul chief Zadaris and Bazdia, her daughter who would one day become Vandali's partner, as well as the ghouls who had once been humans, had educated the other ghouls regarding this matter. Incidentally, the marriage system wasn't as proper as that of Earth. People wouldn't submit documents to the government. They would simply tell their parents, relatives, neighbors and co-workers that they had gotten married. The only documents involved were the family trees of nobles and royalty. But in the reborn Talersheim, everyone would leave behind documented records. "Thank you, everyone," said Vandali. "You've saved me a lot of trouble. Cesare, how is the family register coming along?" "The documents have already been prepared," Cesare reported. "Now we simply need to have them filled in and everything will be complete." According to Vandali's will, a family register had been introduced to Talersheim. There was a system for distributing food, so it would be more convenient to have a family register. Cesare and the others currently managed it, although he was a general, not a civil official. Had he forgotten this himself, perhaps? "Well then, how is the dungeon?" Vandali asked. "We've kept an eye on it and the areas around it, but monsters aren't coming out. We're going to go and clear them now," said Bazdia. "Thank you," said Vandali. "That dungeon was probably something I created, so it might be different from other dungeons." Considering the timing of the appearance of the new dungeon that had appeared in Talersheim's Forest of Immortal Ints, the labyrinth construction skill was clearly involved. That would normally be something to be surprised about, but, so that's it after all. "We thought so," said Bazdia. "Indeed," Sam agreed. "All of the citizens believed that this was the case," said New Aza. Nobody was surprised. "Everyone's reactions are so weak," said Vandali. "Everyone knows that you put a huge amount of your mana into that forest, Van," said Bazdia. Everyone was already saying that a dungeon might appear there. Dungeons are not things that could normally be created artificially, but your mana is in the hundreds of millions, Zadiris added. "Normal limits do not apply to you." "Yes, it is wonderful," said Terra. "If you simply create dungeons in hostile nations and cause monster rampages, we can defeat them without having to fight. Hey, if there are monsters other than undead and insects, we'll be wiped out as well," Kuka pointed out. "If you can choose what the terrain of the dungeon is like, I kind of want to see an ocean." "Can you do it?" asked Bazdia. It seemed that Vandali's ability to create dungeons had been accepted. Terra's thoughts were quite dangerous, but Kuka had reprimanded her for them. Incidentally, Vabi, Jidal and Porvina were playing with Vandali's tongue as if they were grabbing an eel. Vandali's tongue was secreting a lotion-like substance that was gentle on the skin, so there weren't any problems with hygiene. "First of all, let's sort out places for Gopher and the others to live and allocate food and other necessities so that they won't have problems for a while," said Vandali. "Then we'll decide how the criminal slaves will be treated, and after that, let's start clearing and inspecting the dungeon. Regarding currency, I've given Datara the coins we brought from the Hartner Duchy. We'll need to figure out their ratios of valuable metals first. But please think of possible names for the currency and hand your suggestions to Cesare. And about the statue of me, go ahead and build it whenever you want." Examining the dungeon and ensuring that it was safe was the top priority. Currency came after that, And the statue there was an additional one being built every year, so Vandali didn't really mind it now. "Let's leave Bone Man and Notchen to watch over the dungeon while we get our new citizens settled in," said Vandali. "If we neglect to do this, it'll become a disaster in the future." Vandali didn't know how things were in origin, but on Earth, there had always been conflict with existing inhabitants when new inhabitants moved in. The strain caused by immigration policies. Just because he had brought new citizens and convinced them to live here didn't mean that the work was over. "So, it's about time you let me go," Vandali told the women. Let's play some more." Poor Veena protested. In the end, Vandali went to check up on the new citizens while dragging everyone along with him. It seemed that the new citizens would settle into Taylorsheim more quickly than Vandali had imagined. I was surprised about a lot of things at first. It was like we'd gone back in time 200 years, and when we went inside, the buildings and streets looked even more fancy than they did 200 years ago, said Gopher as she placed a reverse piece on a board with a clack. Vandali had used Gelem transmutation to repair Taylorsheim's townscape that had turned into a ruin. Thus, it didn't look much different from before the city's destruction. But carvings in the shapes of faces and eyes of people and birds created by undead Titan stonemasons now decorated the city all over. They were actually all golems designed to detect intruders, but they looked artistic and gave the city a mystical appearance. As a result, Taylorsheim's townscape was something that wouldn't fall short even if compared to Nineland, the capital of the Hartner Duchy. "Also, you're very generous," said Gopher, pointing at the honey-colored cloth of the simple piece of clothing that she was wearing. These were the new clothes that had been distributed to her and the other former Titan slaves after only ever having worn clothes made of tattered linen. They had all been made from the honey silk produced by the cemetery bees. Each person had been given several of them. They had even been given shoes, hats, essential furniture and houses. "It's quite a cheap product, you know," said Vandali. "The cloth isn't dyed, and I'm sure it won't do much against the cold in the winter. Over half of the furniture is stuff I put together really quickly, and the houses were already there and I just allocated them to you. Actually, the houses belonged to you in the first place, didn't they?" "That's true, but you're the one who repaired those houses out of the rubble, aren't you?" Gopher pointed out. "Your Majesty, are you aware? There's a big fuss among the ones from the cultivation village. In Lambda, no matter how great a cultivation project, the people of the cultivation villages wouldn't be provided with living necessities, houses and everything else that they needed. Even those sponsored by the king of a great nation wouldn't be provided with clothes of fine material that only noblemen would wear and fully furnished, properly built stone houses. There had been quite a bit of chaos as those from the first cultivation village wondered if they were dreaming and bowed before the ghouls who distributed the supplies. Perhaps this was only natural, as they had gone from being people of the lowest class in a slave-run mine and suddenly gained a quality of life that exceeded their previous social positions. "A little," said Vandali. "But there is a reason for this. You were all slaves and didn't have any living necessities other than the ones you stole at the mine, so you wouldn't be able to live unless I provided them to you. Also, the houses are actually vacant, so it would be more troublesome to not have you live in them. The former slaves didn't have anything that could be called assets, so there was no choice but to provide them with assets. And since Vandali was supplying them, he couldn't deliberately give them poor products. In fact, there were no poor products to give them. The honey silk was the cloth that he was producing most stably. It would have actually been more problematic to give them linen or cotton clothes. Vandali had created over half of the furniture, but he hadn't used any particularly special materials. He had simply used Gelem transmutation to change the shapes of some pieces of wood. As for the houses, he hadn't done anything other than allocate them to people. He had shuffled people around so that they weren't all living in one place, however. "Wouldn't it be horrible of me to not provide you with anything and tell you to live however you can? I don't have a hobby of collecting empty houses," said Vandali as he clacked his own piece onto the board. "Ah, but I'm happy that you feel grateful towards me," he added. Yes, we are very grateful," said Gopher. "More importantly, what about the stuff other than the practical side of living here?" Vandali asked. "The religion or the undead, for example." "Ah, that? Everyone is calmer about it than you expected," Gopher replied. "Nobody is rejecting anything. Vandali's greatest fear initially was that the former slaves would reject the undead, ghouls and the races that he had created such as the black goblins. But according to Gopher, there was no need to worry about that for now. Everyone prepared themselves to some extent after seeing Livia-sama and Oyaji, Gopher explained. And the ghouls turned out to be pretty nice after actually meeting them, didn't they? I was a little surprised at the black goblins, orcs and kobolds, and we were pretty dumbfounded to see plants moving around in the fields and forest, but well, I suppose it's nothing to worry about. It seemed that the former slaves were more tolerant than Vandali had expected. Perhaps it was because they were inhabitants of a world where there were different races with different appearances and ways of living. Also, the fact that many of them were believers of Veda was perhaps one reason they were so tolerant towards undead. As for religion, it doesn't even need to be said, said Gopher. It's not like we bowed before Elder because we wanted to. We have the Holy Son of Veda here, too. Huh. I suppose that's true, said Vandali. His new Holy Son of Veda title was the biggest reason for that tolerance. The fact that Vandali possessed this title was essentially equivalent to the goddess Veda's personal authorization of his actions. The truth was that the goddess didn't necessarily see everything, but this was how it was being interpreted. Because of this, Gopher and the other former slaves from Taylorsheim, who had believed in Veda from the very beginning as well as those from the cultivation village, who were originally from the Sauron Duchy where Veda's religion had prospered, treated Vandali as a centaur prophet. From Vandali's point of view, things had just turned out this way as a result of him doing whatever he could and whatever he had wanted to do. But Veda was the one god in this world who was friendly towards him, so he was happy to have been acknowledged by her. Actually, you're similar to the champion Zakat, aren't you? I'm sure he used some crazy magic, said Gopher. She and the other former slaves already knew of Vandali's past, which had been announced when he was crowned king of Taylorsheim. It's a little different, though. I don't have cheat-like abilities or anything, said Vandali as he placed a black piece on the board, flipping a white piece over to turn it black. From now on, when people came to Taylorsheim, they would find out about Vandali's past. Leaving aside whether it would actually be believed, the entire continent would know about it once Taylorsheim began trading with foreign countries. Vandali didn't feel any risk in this, however. Being found out by the others reincarnating here or being found out by the Empire or the believers of Alda were meaningless worries. There were so many things in the city that Vandali had reproduced from another world, like miso, soy sauce, mayonnaise and ketchup. It would be stranger to think that he would be able to keep it hidden. If those reincarnated here learned that there was a nation exporting miso and soy sauce, they would probably realize that someone from Earth like them was in that nation, and he would be noticed by the Empire and followers of Alda who prohibited the use of knowledge and technology from another world. That was why it would be healthier on Vandali's mind to simply announce that he had lived in another world in his previous life than to deal with the stress of keeping it a secret. That was what he thought. More importantly, Gopher began. The criminal slaves? Said Vandali. I've assigned them work based on what they're suited to, and I'm planning to release them depending on how they work. Most of the criminal slaves he had brought back to Taylorsheim wouldn't be considered evil people by a Japanese person's values, but that didn't mean that he could simply acquit them. That was why he had heard their requests and had them work under stonemasons, blacksmiths, armsmiths and potters, as well as having them do manual labor and farming work. This also served as training for them to find work in the future, so they would likely be useful after they were released, too. Incidentally, they were being treated worse than people in Japanese prisons. If they lived like Japanese prisoners, other than a lack of freedom, they would be living more luxurious lifestyles than even middle-class workers in Lambda. Japanese prisoners had 3 meals a day with sufficient nutrition, worked 8 hours a day with no overtime and got 1 day's rest every week. In Lambda, which had no Labor Standards Act, this would be incredibly good treatment. Thus, in Taylorsheim, the slaves were given 2 meals a day and 1 day's rest every 10 days. Even then, it was difficult to call this treatment poor in comparison to Lambda's servants and employees who were only given a few days rest a year, and it was heaven compared to the lifestyle they had in the slave-run mine. No, not them. The children? I'll have them learn reading, writing and arithmetic before listening to what they want and having them work in the Supply Distribution Center and the church. Some of them are wondering if I'll make them attend me at night in the future, but I have no plans to do that, said Vandali. I know, said Gopher. Anyone would know that you have no time for that with one look at that you. What I want to ask is, between that one and this one, which one is the real you? There was one spirit form Vandali in front of Gopher, materializing only his fingertips to move the pieces. There were other Vandalius all over the place, talking to the people while performing physical examinations on them and cooking things on iron plates. And a little further away, there was another Vandali, surrounded by beautiful ghoul women, Princess Livia and a young girl who was even larger than Titan children, which was the Vandali that Gopher was talking about. Both are the real me, Vandali replied. You're the one I find most difficult to understand after all, Your Majesty, said Gopher. Mew, communication is difficult after all, Vandali murmured. Why is it so hard when I'm such a friendly, honest king who visits the people like this? He wondered. Title explanation, Holy Son of Veda. This is a title that indicates that the bearer is especially loved or acknowledged by Veda, the goddess of life and love. In the past, only the founders of her new races such as vampires or dark elves, or those she gave divine messages or trials, received this title. Because of this, such individuals are respected as saints by Veda's followers and members of her races. This title increases the ability to understand divine messages from Veda, as well as providing a bonus to the clergyman's skill. Normally, life attribute magic would receive a bonus as well, but Vandali does not have an affinity for the life attribute, so he does not gain this bonus. Chapter 86, The Eclipse King's Orchard. Dealing with immigration had gone better than expected, so Vandali decided to clear the dungeon in the Immortal Int Forest and inspect his skills earlier than he had planned. I'm going to follow you this time, Darso exclaimed. I was so lonely. But Vandali, I think it's too early for you to become independent of me. I mean, you were still asleep when I got back, weren't you, Mum? Darsa, who was a weak spirit, spent most of her time sleeping in the small bone fragment that she inhabited. It just so happened that she had been sleeping when Vandali returned. However, he did think that it might have been for the best for Darsa to not be present at the time. So, I was thinking, what if you turn me into a fire ghost like Livia-san? Asked Darsa. I was burned to death as well, I'm sure I'm suited for it. Wait, I've acquired a way to create homunculi, so wait just a little more, Vandali told her. But if I become a ghost, I can help you and always be with you, Vandali, she said. I'm begging you, please wait a little longer, said Vandali. Also, something might happen to you if evil gods are around. I have to hurry with this, he thought. Aren't there any evil gods, any wicked gods? Boy, why are you holding a hatchet in one hand? Asked Zadyrus. Also, I do not think that there would be any evil gods in a dungeon that has only just appeared. No, I thought there was a sliver of hope that there would be, said Vandali. He stopped his Mage impression and looked up at the dungeon that had appeared in the Immortal Int Forest. The members who were exploring this dungeon were Porvina and the other youths, the women minus Eleonora, Bone Man, Vigoro, 10 cemetery bees and Luciliano, the baggage carrier. But I am someone who works with my mind, Master, Luciliano protested. You don't actually have to carry the baggage, said Vandali. Watch our spells from behind, and if you have any advice, go ahead and give it to us. Although Luciliano was a unique class adventurer, his ability in battle was quite unimpressive. However, although he had apparently been partially excommunicated, he was a mage who had studied under a master at the Mages Guild. He might have knowledge or ways of thinking that Vandali and the others didn't have, as they were mostly self-taught. And you're supposed to be my apprentice, aren't you? Please watch my magic, and if you think that there's somewhere else I could apply it, let me know, said Vandali. I shall do that, Master, said Luciliano. Thinking that this was impossible, Vandali faintly hoped that Luciliano would give up. But if the inside is too narrow or the monsters are strong, we'll come back and start again, said Vandali. I know, said Kuka. But it's all right, I've become much stronger than I was last time. You won't cry? Vandali asked her. I won't cry. I definitely won't cry. They entered the dungeon while teasing Kuka to find that there was a forest inside. It was different to the Devil's Nest forest, the forests full of broad-leaved trees near Talersheim and the forests filled with giant ferns in Borkus's subdragon savanna. It was a coniferous forest with pine and cedar trees. While you were away, we ventured into the first floor to ensure that a monster rampage did not occur, and this was how it appeared. My lord, said Bone Man. The monsters were like that. Bone Man was pointing at an enormous, brightly colored mushroom that completely destroyed the feeling of this place being a coniferous forest rank 3 poison mushroom. They looked like giant mushrooms with limbs, but despite their charming appearance, they were vicious monsters that attacked living things and killed them, leaving spores on their corpses in order to reproduce. There were 3 of them standing there. They're standing up, said Vandali. At this distance, they're within range of bows and arrows. But why are those monsters just standing there? Bazdio asked. Perhaps it's because there are so many of us that they are on guard now? Darcy suggested. No, they would run if that were the case, said Zadyrus. Well, I suppose we should try and attack them. Bastia, Zadyrus and Kaka cast their spells to try attacking them. All of them were spells intended to test the waters, so none of them had much power. The poison mushrooms remained motionless and took the attacks from the front. They were cut by blades of wind and the fragrant smell of burning mushrooms drifted into the air. They're not moving, Vandali remarked. Hiri, said Zadyrus. This is how the monsters have been, said Bone Man. Incidentally, I also defeated 4 of them with my bow and arrows. Jiu. I threw my axe to defeat a few of them as well, said Vigoro. They were different monsters to these ones, though. So you defeated them. There's something that I'm curious about, so please try defeating those poison mushrooms, said Vandali. Very well, leave it to me. Zadyrus, who was holding the staff that Vandali had taken from the mansion of the Mages Guild's guildmaster, used the Blade of Light spell to defeat the poison mushrooms in the blink of an eye. Vandali looked at the defeated person-shaped mushrooms for a while before tilting his head in confusion. Those poison mushrooms have no souls, he said. I wonder why. Indeed, I can't see them, said Darsa. Isn't that because they're plants? Bildo asked. Even plants have souls, Bildo, Vandali told her. He didn't know about other worlds, but plants in Lambda had souls. To be more precise, a soul resided in every living thing. It was true that he didn't know if microscopic organisms and viruses had souls. He couldn't see them without an electron microscope. But plants had souls, so it was difficult to imagine that poison mushrooms wouldn't have them. Also, poison mushrooms we defeated in other places had souls, Vandali pointed out. Then why in the world don't they have any? Darsa wondered. Aren't the souls still somewhere inside? Vigoro asked. No, they're already dead, said Vandali. But let's check whether there are magic stones. Magic stones normally appeared in the parts of the monster where their hearts were when they died. Thus, if magic stones were present in a monster's body, it was certain that the monster was dead. Cutting open the poison mushrooms' bodies revealed that magic stones had indeed appeared. These poison mushrooms were unmistakably dead. I don't understand, said Vandali. It's not like I broke their souls, but they were able to exist without them. Luciliano, do you have any ideas? He asked. Master, I am a mage, not a spiritualist, so I could not possibly know, Luciliano replied. I did not pay it much attention earlier, but thinking about it again, it is strange after all, said Bone Man. Could it be because this is a dungeon that you created, my lord? Indeed, it is difficult to say as I have never heard of an artificially created dungeon before, but well, apart from undead, only spiritualists and you can see whether they have souls or not. Boy, said Zadyrus. They couldn't be certain of anything. It was unclear as to what principles and mechanisms were at work to generate monsters inside dungeons, so they didn't know anything at all. Well, as for why they have no souls, the next time I have the opportunity to meet a god, I'll ask, said Vandali, but there was no telling whether any gods would even answer his question. This question was stepping into the realms beyond mortal knowledge. Dungeons generated monsters one after another thanks to the Demon King Eudiranes' circle of transmigration system. The countless souls flowing through the system were used to create the monsters of the dungeons. This applied for dungeons created by the evil gods as well. But Vandali didn't have his own circle of transmigration system, nor did he know of a way to use the other systems. Because of this, the monsters in the dungeon created by Vandali were like soulless robots with living bodies. The exceptions were monsters that had entered the dungeon from outside or monsters whose empty bodies had been possessed by exterior souls. The same applied for Heinz's skeleton caverns near the city of Nierki. The monsters had been programmed to move based on Vandali's hatred and obeyed this programming the moment they were born. Other than the monsters in this initial monster rampage, the monsters of that dungeon didn't have souls. But this information was only known to the gods, so Vandali and his companions couldn't even make such conjectures. They had no choice but to put this matter aside for now and continue on. Well, isn't it fine? Said Darsa. You can still earn experience points, can't you? Vandali shook his head. We can, but since they're just standing like scarecrows, we won't get practice for our skills, he said. It would be better if they just attacked us normally. There were poison apes nearby, apes with venomous saliva, motionless like the poisonous mushrooms. The moment Vandali finished speaking, as if a switch had been flipped, they attacked his party. After being surprised by the poisonous apes but defeating them without incident, Vandali and his party investigated why they had suddenly begun moving by examining other monsters. Stop, turn over, paw, stay, come, stop. Yes. The only ones that work seem to be stop and come, said Vandali, watching the rank 4 poison ants freeze like dolls and attack by swinging their branches based on his commands. How surprising is it different from taming them? Asked Kuka. Yes, it is, Vandali replied. They don't obey any other commands. For example, please take me around this place 3 times. There was the sound of buzzing wings. The cemetery bees grabbed Vandali's legs, flew up and took him around 3 times before letting him back down on the ground. And now take me around this place 3 times. Vandali tried giving the same command to the poison ants, but they stayed frozen, not moving an inch. As you can see, they don't respond to my words. Wouldn't one normally tell them to spin around 3 times? Luciliano muttered. His words were ignored as everyone gave these strange monsters bewildered looks. It does seem to be different from taming, said Bazdia. Isn't it because they have no souls? I don't know much about soulless creatures, though, said Kuka. Perhaps they do listen to some of Vandali's commands because he's the one who created this dungeon? Darsa suggested. Indeed, now that I think about it, they seem quite similar to golems, said Bazdia. Similar to golems? Luciliano repeated. Feeling relieved that he hadn't been ignored this time, he began explaining. Golems are puppets created by alchemists, although there are various ways to create them. The one thing they have in common is that they produce golems with no souls. Thus, in order to move, they require direct orders from the alchemist that is their master, or they must be provided with artificial personalities with orders given to them beforehand. It is said that golems as useful and capable of making decisions as humans existed in the age of the gods, but now, even those that merely respond to the sound of their masters' voices and are able to obey a number of simple commands are considered high-class products, master. The golems that Van creates are quite different, though, said Bazdia. No alchemist is capable of creating golems as capable as masters, said Luciliano, his mouth twitching. If they could, the world would undergo a revolution. After coming to Taylorsheim and seeing the golem surveillance network and golem factories that used golems in place of machines, Luciliano had experienced several occasions of shock that nullified his previous knowledge. Luciliano had become Vandali's apprentice after admiring the way that he used the many beautiful, fearsome ghosts to cast a spell to cave in a 500-meter-tall rocky mountain without any incantation, but not even a few days had passed since coming to Taylorsheim and had already seen numerous things that overturned concepts that mages took for granted. He didn't even want to count them anymore. Leaving that revolution aside, it does seem that the reason the monsters are behaving so strangely is the fact that they have no souls, said Luciliano. Vandali, who didn't have a good idea of these concepts that mages took for granted, simply accepted this explanation and nodded. He also decided to cut down these poison ants with his claws for now. They won't make for good training like this, so I'll have them attack us normally, he said. From then on, the monsters attacked the party normally like monsters in any other dungeon. Vandali didn't know how it worked, but all of the monsters seemed to be this way even as they moved down the floors, so it was likely that all of the monsters in the entire dungeon would be like this. Later on, we'll have to check whether the monsters still behave like this when Vandali isn't here, said Vigoro. You are right, Zadyrus agreed. If we need the boy to give them orders every time, they will not make for good training. You can gather materials and experience points safely, so why would you go out of your way to make it more difficult? Luciliano wondered. Vigoro and Zadyrus were of a warrior race, but Luciliano gave them a perplexed look, seemingly unable to understand. A dungeon where monsters of rank 4 and greater could be hunted, every nation would want this dungeon if they knew about it. What are you saying? Asked Zadyrus. You are an adventurer, are you not? I am an adventurer, but not all adventurers like adventures, Luciliano replied. I suppose there would be a lot of people who would continue doing this because they can't gain experience points any other way. And even if our skills don't level up, we gain levels. I might have been pretty happy with this before I became a ghoul, said Kuka. She seemed to agree with Luciliano. It seemed that not all adventurers were warriors. This fact surprised everyone other than these two. What did you say? Are adventurers not always full of fighting spirit? Zadyrus exclaimed in shock. I thought everyone was as reckless as me, said Vigoro. Are they not? Asked Livia. Borkus in particular was always saying that combat was the daily bread of warriors in Taylorsheim. Jiayu, I was so surprised that my jaw, my lord, please pick it up for me, said Bone Man. It's hard to believe. What do you think, Van? Basdio asked. It was not only the ghouls, who had only encountered adventurers who had come to hunt them, who thought that adventurers all loved fighting. Princess Livia had believed this as well. The adventurers I know are Mum, Kuka, Balkus and the others. I think that people like Kuka are in the minority, said Vandali as he picked up Bone Man's jaw. It seemed that one couldn't gain good knowledge with a small view of the world. Vandali's party descended from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor, checking whether there were any monsters or traps. There were some differences between the floors of this dungeon, such as the leaves of the trees and patches of wetlands, but they were mostly forests. Other than the top few floors, the monsters were mostly plant-type monsters of rank 4 and above. The next most common monsters were insects, amphibians, reptiles, animals and fish in that order. Many of the monsters had the ability to inflict poison and disease, so anyone trying to clear this dungeon without preparing properly beforehand could run into unexpected difficulties. If they weren't undead, that is. There were quite a few traps, too. Pitfalls, webs that fell from overhead, vines that dragged the victim's legs up into the air. There were even logs with spikes that came flying from the side when tripwires were carelessly triggered. They weren't the kinds of traps that would be found in ruins, they were mostly the kind of traps that would be used in guerrilla warfare. If the difficulty of the dungeon was formally classified, I suppose it would be considered class, said Luciliano. Class, huh? The only class dungeon around before this was Balkus's Subdragon Savannah, so everyone should be happy, said Vigoro. It's been packed every day, added Basdier. Lately, it's not been unusual for there to be more people trying to clear the dungeon than monsters inside it. Actually, nobody goes to clear the D-class dungeons except for the stonemasons and fishermen nowadays, so they're pretty empty, said Kuka. I'm not going to them these days, either. There were 4 other dungeons near Taylorsheim, but there was only one B-class dungeon and one class dungeon, so Basdia and Kuka had been finding it troublesome to find a place to train. The class dungeon is packed full of people? Are the people here monsters? Luciliano wondered. Normally, dungeons of class and above wouldn't be packed. There were few adventurers who could progress to class and beyond. D-class dungeons, on the other hand, would be contested hunting grounds for the many D-class adventurers. The only times when class dungeons were full of people was when the first couple of floors contained desirable items for veteran D-class adventurers, or when certain products or monster materials were selling for a higher price than normal. Nobody could blame Luciliano for being amazed. Things weren't like this 200 years ago, though, said Livia. Until Vandali brought Livia's-san and the others back, it was like the whole nation except for me and the children were adventurers, said Darsa. And us undead do not tire, said Bone Man. We can train in the dungeons for days on end, Jiu. On top of that, I train in the dungeons, and the ingredients for fish sauce, miso and soy sauce can only be gathered in the dungeons. Everyone's working hard, said Vandali. As a result, the tireless undead and the normally lazy ghouls visited the dungeons often. Everyone leveled up, and until the former slaves moved into Taylorsheim, most citizens were about as capable as class adventurers in battle. Without the dungeons, we'd have to walk about half a day away from the city to find monsters of rank 5 or higher, said Basdia. I don't want to leave Judel alone for too long. Raising children is difficult, isn't it? But this place is right inside the city, and you could make day trips if you're just venturing into the first few floors, couldn't you? Said Darsa. Also, the trading post is close by, so moving materials there won't be too hard, said Bilder. The 3 housewives were having a dangerous conversation. Working women do need to consider the distance and methods of transport, Vandali agreed. The next time I make a dungeon, I'll make it closer to the city. I wonder if I can dismantle Duran's Valley and Duran's aquatic caverns and rebuild them somewhere else. It would be convenient if you could, but I have never heard of dungeons being moved in such a way, said Zadyrus. Luciliano gave a hollow laugh. Master appears to be very free, but I wonder who I am supposed to discuss things with. Jiu, it appears that my lord's apprentice has finally realized that superficial efforts will not make him worthy, said Bone Man. After that, Vandali and his party continued through the endless dungeon, inspecting his new skills and investigating whether the dungeon's products and monster materials were usable. Bloodwork was simply a superior version of the blood-sucking skill. The amount of stamina and mana recovered by drinking blood was dramatically greater than through blood-sucking, wounds healed faster and it seemed to increase his attribute values as well, though only by a few %. Also, this skill was apparently quite famous. Luciliano was familiar with its details. It is a skill that indicates that one has consumed enough blood for the skill to become a superior skill, and many who possess the skill are apparently assaulted by a powerful thirst for blood, he explained. But you are perfectly fine, aren't you, Master? Due to the skill's properties, many who possessed it were powerful vampires, and the reason they manipulated humans in the shadows was to maintain a reliable source of blood to drink. I can drink as much blood as I want by hunting whatever monsters are available, can't I? Said Vandali. The thirst for blood wasn't something he had been avoiding. Although he would have had a tough time on Earth or in Origin, Lambda was full of threats. There were always monsters to hunt. And unlike vampires, who valued the blood of virgins, Vandali didn't care whether the blood came from a middle-aged man, a bandit or an orc. He didn't have any particular preferences when it came to the taste of blood. He didn't enjoy strong-smelling goblin blood or the blood of animals with bad-tasting meat, however. Speaking of which, what are the vampire zombies working under Eleonora doing for blood? Zedaris asked. I have not seen them drinking blood very often. When they were training in the dungeons with us, they were drinking monster blood, Vigoro told her. They sometimes drink a little of my blood, too, said Vandali. The vampire zombies, don't they absorb some whenever they eat raw meat? Whenever they eat raw meat? I suppose I shouldn't have asked this question in a country of undead. Luciliano had been treated like an outsider in human society, but he was astounded to find that in Talersheim, he was a normal person. He was worried that he would lose his title of degenerate. Next was the inspection of Vandali's insect binding technique, but this turned out to be simple as well. It's really going inside, said Vandali. Is that really all right? Basdio asked. There doesn't appear to be any particular problems, Vandali replied. There was a large, vividly colored, venomous-looking earthworm in his hand. And then it slowly dug its way inside his hand. Wasn't that a pain worm? It's only rank 1, but it has tiny, poisonous needles growing all over its body, asked Kuka. So it seems, said Vandali. How can you be so calm about it? Basdia and Kuka's voices sounded a little strained as they watched the pain worm disappear completely inside Vandali's hand. But there wasn't a single wound on his white, unhealthy-looking, candle wax-like skin. My vitality hasn't gone down, either, so it does seem that there isn't any problem with this, said Vandali. Jayu? Are you saying that you consumed the creature? Bone Man asked. No, I don't think that's the case, Vandali replied. Look, it can come out whenever it wants to, too. The pain worm slowly emerged from Vandali's other hand. It plopped onto the ground, but Pete leapt out after it, grabbed it in his mouth and returned to Vandali's hand. It's difficult to believe, but it seems that insect binding technique is a skill that allows one to equip insects to the body, said Basdia. Equip insects, will they actually be useful? It's not like you can punch enemies with insects, right? Said Vigoro. Well, that explains the mystery of why Pete settled in my hair, said Vandali. As for whether they'll be useful, they probably will be. Cemetery bees, can you enter my body in the same way? Showing no signs of hesitation, the cemetery bees silently entered Vandali's body. They forced themselves mercilessly into Vandali's head despite their size, so it looked quite grotesque, but Vandali didn't feel any discomfort or pain. And then once the cemetery bees were completely inside him, Vandali was able to control them as if they were a part of his body. He could poke their heads out from his hands or their poisonous stingers from the tip of his tongue. In the same way, he was able to produce Pete from anywhere in his body on command. I see, so I can control any insect-type monster that I've tamed, Vandali concluded. By the way, what's wrong? Everyone except for Vandali's apprentice touched their own heads cautiously as they looked up at him. It's just that they were completely inside your head, so I was wondering if it's really alright, said Basdia. My lord, it may be fine for you, but to those watching, it appears as if you are being consumed by the insects, Jayu, said Bone Man. I'll make sure to avoid using this in front of people. By the way, what about Luciliano? He's fainted over there, but I suppose we can't blame him, said Kuka. Insect binding technique was a skill that allowed Vandali to equip insects inside his body, and if those insects were tamed, then he could produce them or a part of their bodies from his own at will. But if the insects stayed equipped for more than a few hours, they would begin taking the nutrients they required from the host's body. In other words, Vandali had to eat a lot in order to avoid losing vitality to them. That was the kind of skill it was. It would probably be another excellent skill for Vandali alongside dead spirit magic. What if I equipped the insectoid monsters that I've tamed, entered a city and registered at the Tammers Guild? Vandali wondered. I am a ghoul, so I do not know much about guilds, but I believe that it would be best to give up on this idea, said Zadyrus. Vandali, I don't think it's a good idea, either, said Darsa. I'm sure you'll shock everyone. It'll be more than a shock, said Kuka. Luciliano hasn't even woken up yet. There should be relatively harmless monsters like pixies living somewhere, shouldn't there? Asked Vandali. At the very least, it seemed that there were no pixies in this dungeon. Are pixies insects? Darsa wondered. For now, I'm going to tame useful-looking insectoid monsters and equip them, said Vandali. It's probably best to test how many I can fit at the same time, too. Try to make sure they're cute ones, okay? Said Kuka. I'll see how it goes. Vandali nodded, but he couldn't really imagine what Kuka had in mind. What were these cute insects that Kuka mentioned? Bees and centipedes didn't seem to fit the criteria, so would lice, perhaps? The focus of this expedition was the inspection of the labyrinth construction skill, but not all of its details could be seen immediately. As Vandali examined this skill, more new effects revealed themselves. First, whenever Vandali descended to a new floor, he could see its overall layout. The moment he took his first step, a map would appear over his head. He could also change the structure of floors that had already been cleared. He could build walls, set traps and even create staircases connecting floors, though only when both floors had already been cleared. Oh, there's a wall of trees appearing right in front of us. To think that you could make pitfalls and even stairs. It uses up quite a lot of mana though, said Vandali. Small traps and walls cost 10,000, and 10 million for stairs that lead both up and down. But it's not a lot for you, is it, Van? Asked Bazdier. That's true. That's amazing, Vandali, said Darsa. If you used it to create walls on all sides, we could rest safely, couldn't we? Depending on their layout, the walls of any dungeon could be made of trees, cliffs, stones, bricks, unidentified metals or even like the internal organs of an enormous creature, but the thing that they all in common was that their structure couldn't be altered artificially. The cliffs of Duran's Valley and the minerals of Duran's aquatic caverns could be temporarily broken and chipped, but they would return to normal after a few days at most. Even disarmed traps would be replaced, although it was a mystery as to who had set them. If this weren't the case, high-class dungeons would collapse during battles between high-rank monsters and the mighty adventurers challenging them, so perhaps it was only natural that they had self-repairing functions. Building additional walls or setting traps was impossible. It was certainly difficult to bring the materials to do so into a dungeon, but even if one did take the effort to do these things, they would be destroyed by monsters or simply disappear eventually. Even in dungeons that were like labyrinths with stone walls, monsters wouldn't destroy the walls unless they happened to hit them during battle. But they would destroy any artificially built walls without hesitation. Even if monsters didn't destroy them, they would be identified as foreign objects and the dungeon's self-repair function would cause them to disappear as if they were damage caused to the dungeon. Even though Vandali could use his golem transmutation skill to mine rock and minerals, he couldn't make large changes to the structures of dungeons. However, the walls made by labyrinth construction changed the dungeon itself, so it was highly likely that they would stay there. Monsters destroyed the walls you made with golem transmutation, but they simply avoided and passed by the walls you made with labyrinth creation, said Darsa. Truly amazing, Your Majesty, said Livia. If you can use this skill in other dungeons, there is no telling how much easier everyone's lives would become. No, it's not really that big a deal, said Vandali, feeling shy about being praised. But the great discovery came after this. It seemed that Vandali and those with him could teleport freely to any cleared floor in the dungeon. From the 23rd floor to the 1st floor. From the 1st floor to the 17th floor. Whether it was the mid-boss's floor or the dungeon's deepest floor where the boss was, they could go anywhere except for the dungeon's treasure chamber. And it wasn't only the entrances to the floors that they could teleport to. They could teleport to any point in a cleared floor. Even the magic items installed in dungeons through advanced alchemy weren't capable of doing this. Teleporting is interesting, isn't it? Said Vandali. I suppose this makes you invincible in any dungeon you have already cleared once. Boy, said Zadyrus. Yeah, I think any adventurer who works in dungeons would want this ability, said Kuka. With the materials, treasure and tamed monsters in hand, Vandali and his party left the dungeon. To place the spirits around you into the soulless monsters, is this not an artificial reincarnation? Said Luciliano, trembling unnaturally in shock and fear. My lord, it seems that your apprentice is going to begin foaming at the mouth soon. Should you not have held back a little? Bone Man suggested. Vandali thought that Luciliano was overreacting. In his mind, there was nothing different from this and creating golems or undead. Also, the monsters that were following him now were important to him. I want fruits and spices, after all, said Vandali. I can't hold back. The dungeon had contained all kinds of plant-type monsters, and among them, there had been ints and monster plants formed from trees that produced fruit. There were wild strawberry, watermelon and capsicum monster plants as well as ints that produced pears, cherries, raspberries, blueberries, coffee, citrus fruits, bananas, mangoes, avocados and sap that could be turned into syrup. There were even monsters bearing fruits that Vandali didn't know. He didn't know whether these fruits existed on Earth. Jayu. In that case, it cannot be helped, said Bone Man as he quickly joined Vandali in enjoying the fruits that he had never seen before. Despite being made of bones, he was quite the big eater. The next day, this dungeon was named the Eclipse King's Orchard. Name, Luciliano. Race, human. Age, 29 years old. Title: Degenerate. Job, slave. Level, 81. Job history: apprentice mage, mage. Life attribute: mage. Undead user, alchemist. Passive skills: mental corruption. Level 2 mental fortitude, Level 3 augmented mana, Level 4 mana cost reduction, Level 3 detect presence, Level 2 fatigue, hunger resistance, Level 1 active skills, life attribute magic, Level 7 earth attribute magic, Level 3 no attribute magic, Level 3 mana control, Level 7 alchemy, Level 5 staff technique, Level 2 silent steps, Level 1 etiquette, Level 1 mining, Level 1 a rare research type adventurer. He is class, but his actual ability in combat is equivalent to a D-class adventurer. His high-level magic is specialized for creating undead. The undead he makes are live dead that he creates by granting life force to fresh corpses, so they are different from the specimens that Vandali creates. Incidentally, he lost his qualifications as an adventurer when he became a slave. Chapter 87, Actually, let's get on with creating a currency. After clearing the Eclipse King's Orchard, the forest of immortal ints became much livelier. The trees that had fruits hanging from them all year round were like treasure boxes of fruit. There was also a large reformation in Talersheim. Traveling to dungeons had become easier, people no longer had to venture beyond the walls to reach them. Duran's Valley, Duran's aquatic caverns, Balkas's subdragon savanna and Barajan's endlife mountain had all been moved inside the city. It seemed that Vandali's labyrinth construction skill was able to move dungeons that he had previously cleared. Moving them at the speed of someone walking at a brisk pace. It costs about 10,000 mana every minute, but I regenerate about 10,000 mana every second with the automatic mana recovery skill, so with enough time, I can move dungeons anywhere, said Vandali. The dungeon's entrances followed behind him with the sound of something being dragged along the ground, but there were no changes to the insides. Everyone, not just Luciliano, was dumbfounded to see this. Vandali was even able to teleport from the entrance of any dungeon he had previously cleared to the entrance of any other previously cleared dungeon. Unlike teleportation between dungeon floors, this teleportation only worked for himself, but since the ghosts following him and the insects he had equipped were treated as a part of him, he could bring them along. He had even been able to teleport to the dungeon that he had cleared years ago, before he had even met Zedorus and the ghouls, so it seemed that he was able to go to any dungeon anywhere as long as he had cleared it before. I suppose we should go and clear the dungeon I made in the Eki next time, said Vandali. More importantly, Master, should you not simply just create lots of small dungeons all over the place? Luciliano suggested. You can create them, can't you? Well, it does use up a considerable amount of mana, though, said Vandali. He had tried creating a small dungeon just to test this ability out, but it turned out to be much more difficult work than moving an existing dungeon. Creating a single dungeon required an hour of concentration and consumed 100 million mana. The resulting dungeon was a dungeon with a single floor, filled with only rank 1 monsters such as horned rabbits and big frogs. It seems that when creating dungeons, the amount of mana, time and the effect it has on my mental state depends on the skills level, said Vandali. The Eclipse King's Orchard had been formed as a result of the hundreds of millions of mana that he had poured into the ground on numerous occasions. The 30-floor class dungeon, Heinz's skeleton caverns had been created as a result of him reaching such a mental state that his consciousness disappeared and his mana pool ran empty. He had no recollection of what had happened afterwards. It seemed that Vandali wasn't yet able to freely create dungeons of the difficulty he desired. It appeared that the dungeon's interior structures were also similar to the areas surrounding the places they were created in. That was why the Eclipse King's orchard was a forest environment. However, Vandali was able to change the dungeon's difficulty and number of floors after they had been built. He spent time during the next day pouring mana into the one-floor dungeon to find that it had become a two-floored dungeon. He could probably increase the difficulty of dungeons in the same way. And wouldn't he become able to make the dungeons more freely once his skill leveled up? There wasn't any pressing reason for him to become able to create high-difficulty dungeons right away, so this was probably fine for now. The labyrinth construction skills features were as follows. Allows Vandali to create dungeons. However, freely changing its floors, difficulty and interior structure was impossible at this point in time. Gives Vandali knowledge of the layout of a dungeon's floor by stepping foot into it. The monsters appearing in the dungeons have no souls. Because of this, Vandali is able to exercise limited control over them. In order to tame them, he must have appropriate spirits possess their bodies. Allows Vandali and his allies to teleport between previously cleared floors in a dungeon. Allows Vandali to alter the structure of previously cleared floors in a dungeon. He can place or remove walls, doors and traps, as well as create stairs that connect separate floors. Allows Vandali to move dungeons. This has no effect on the interior structure of the dungeons. Allows Vandali to teleport from the entrances of previously cleared dungeons to the entrances of other previously cleared dungeons. However, only the insects he has equipped and astral-type undead can accompany him when he teleports in this way. Vandali altered the structure of Duran's aquatic caverns, installing stone pipes to draw salt water in order to create salt pans outside the dungeon. It would be convenient if other people could freely teleport between dungeons as well, but I wonder if I could make a magic item for that? Vandali wondered as he munched on a delicious fruit similar to an apple. The levels of the labyrinth creation, strength and followers and death attribute charm skills have increased. Around the same time, Rod Corti was spending all of his time and energy on his circle of transmigration system, which was now producing frequent errors. What in the world is the meaning of this? A large number of Lambda's souls have left the system. Did Vida's races do something? Hundreds, thousands of souls were leaving Rod Corti's control at a time. This was something that had occurred countless times before when races like vampires, ghouls and Mage who were capable of turning members of other races into members of their own races caused souls under Rod Corti's control to be taken in by Vida's system. However, this didn't happen very frequently. At the very least, hundreds or thousands of souls would not leave Rod Corti's control within a single day. The cause of this was that Vandali had made large numbers of the spirits accompanying him possess the soulless monsters of the Eclipse King's orchard in order to tame them. Vandali had done this thinking that it was no different from creating undead and golems, but as Luciliano had pointed out, it was equivalent to reincarnating these souls. In the same way that he had made a spirit possess the live-dead's fetus in order to create Porvina, he was making spirits possess living monsters rather than corpses or inanimate objects. Vandali was merely a mortal, but he had started performing the work of a god. He had to perform everything manually, but it was equivalent to running his own circle of transmigration system. Vida's races generally needed the consent of members of other races in order to convert them to members of their own race, but in Vandali's case, the spirits were completely charmed by him. Under his command, they were happy to be reborn as plant or insectoid monsters. And so, a new circle of transmigration system had been born in Lambda, one that trespassed on Rod Corti's authority, one that was more unstable and more arbitrary in function than Vida's circle of transmigration system that Elder was apprehensive about. What in the world is happening? But Rod Corti was pressed to deal with the errors in his own system. It would be some time before he learned the truth. Incidentally, this also caused frequent error in the Demon King's circle of transmigration system, but it had already been producing errors every day. Its normal working state was one that was producing errors. Thus, unlike the breaking of Serkrent's soul, this was not considered a particularly great problem by the remnants of the Demon King's army, including Hihiri-Ushukaka, the god of joyful life. Around the time of year where every region would be conducting their harvest festivals, the five-colored blades were trying to make a harvest of their own. Gua. Curse you, humans. They were harvesting not produce and fruit, but the head of a nobleman of dark knights who had grown fat from drinking the blood of the people, a vampire. "How did you know about this place, about our existence?" shouted a man named Chiparas. He had served as the submaster of the Commerce Guild for 10 years, retired due to old age, and was now a good-natured old man who provided advice for young, aspiring merchants. But none would consider him a good-natured old man if they could see him now, crimson-eyed and baring his fangs like a beast. "It's all thanks to a good-willed informant," said Heinz. "Tch. Those traitors? They sold us out after receiving Turnisha-sama's blessings?" Chiparas, who was no longer acting like a merchant, readied his claws with a movement unbefitting of his obese body. Most of the subordinate vampires and noble-born vampires working under Chiparas had already been defeated by Heinz's companions. He had very few allies remaining now. But although his eyes showed hatred, they didn't show despair. "I could have forgiven you if you were simply keeping that damper as a pet, but now that you have caused me so much disgrace, I shall kill all of you and present your heads as a present to Turnisha-sama," he shrieked. Chiparas's movements were far quicker than one would expect from his appearance, but Heinz saw through it immediately and his magic sword sliced deep into Chiparas's stomach. Blue light flame blade. This was a martial skill of radiant god swordsmanship, Heinz's awakened superior skill that he had gained after moving to the Orborm Kingdom and becoming a part of Alga's peaceful faction. The martial skill that unleashed Heinz's light attribute and life attribute mana in addition to the magic sword's normal attack power would cause a fatal blow to a vampire even with a light graze. This martial skill had sliced deep into Chiparas's round belly. Even a vampire with an astounding amount of vitality wouldn't be able to resist this. "Few, that will not work on me." Diamond Rend. "What?" Instead of being defeated, Chiparas sneered and used an advanced martial skill of the unarmed fighting technique in an attempt to tear Heinz to pieces. He swung his claws with the strength of a colossus. Heinz barely managed to use the swordsmanship martial skill, Flowing Willow, to stop the attack and opened his eyes wide in shock to see that Chiparas was unharmed. Kihaha. Because of the divine protection of Hai-Hai-Ryushukaka, the evil god of joyful life, I have been granted the life attribute nullification skill. Chiparas cackled. "Your sword technique has no effect." It was probably because of this skill that Chiparas, who was supposed to be a vampire, remained unharmed despite the fact that the mansion's walls had been destroyed and the sunlight was hitting him directly. "Ha ha ha ha. I am a vampire marquis. I am one of Turnisha's 3 most powerful chief vassals, even if you are a class. Did you think that a human like you could defeat?" Chiparas faltered mid-sentence, a suspicious look on his face. "You bastard. What are you playing at?" Heinz had raised his sword, facing Chiparas directly. "Are you listening to what I am saying? Your powerful radiant god swordsmanship and your light and life attribute magic will not work against me." Ignoring Chiparas, Heinz focused and sharpened his mind. Transcend limits, magic sword. The image in his mind was one of a single blade. Familiar spirit descent. Heinz was enveloped in a pillar of light that descended from the sky, and wings made of light sprouted from his back, a sign that a familiar spirit of Alga had descended upon him. "You bastard. Can you not tell that your efforts are futile?" Chiparas shouted. Against Chiparas, who possessed the life attribute nullification skill, there was little meaning in Alga's familiar spirit descending upon Heinz. However, it was angry words rather than scornful laughter that were coming from Chiparas's mouth. Unable to withstand the pressure that grew stronger as Heinz's power became greater, Chiparas activated his own Transcend Limits skill, giving his body an explosive increase in physical strength. Dai. Endless Twin Claw Blades. Ice Beast Pack Assault. Chiparas used a martial skill in which the claws of both of his arms were swung in rapid succession, with beasts of ice conjured by water attribute magic filling in the gaps between his attacks with their claws and fangs. This was Chiparas's consecutive attack that would result in certain victory. This was the trump card that he had used to climb the ranks of the vampire's twisted society, where one couldn't survive on resourcefulness alone. The moment this swarm of blades reached Heinz, he swung his magic sword. Evil crushing blue radiant flash. Chiparas's claws, which were harder than adamantite, fell apart as if they were made of glass, along with the beasts of ice. The blade of the magic sword sank into his body as if being absorbed, and silently pierced through it. This fearsome slash didn't stop the ceiling and walls of the mansion were cut apart and erased. Impossible. Heinz heard the 2 pieces of Chiparas, who had been cut in half in a line from his head to his crotch, falling to the ground behind him. He exhaled and returned his magic sword to its sheath. Even if you have a nullification skill that transcends resistance skills, I won't lose so long as I have a will to carry out justice," he murmured. "That's all well and good, but I wish you'd fight a little better," whispered Deliza, the female dwarf shield-bearer. She had charged into the mansion with Edgar and the others. She was looking not at Chyparas, whose two separate halves were burning in blue flames, but at the place where the mansion's walls had been. The mountain beyond that spot had also been cut. It had been cleanly split in two. "The mountain beyond the mansion belongs to Chyparas, there aren't any people so it should be fine," said Hines. "That's not the problem, is it, now?" said Deliza. "I only split the mountain, I haven't cut down too many trees, so Diana probably won't be angry, will she?" said Hines. Deliza put her face in her hands. "Ah, you Justice Meathead." Hines undid his familiar spirit descent. Justice Meathead was his nickname among his companions. In reality, he had defeated Chyparas, an enemy whose nullification skill that rendered everything ineffective except for the attack power of the magic sword itself, by repeatedly strengthening himself a ridiculous number of times before unleashing the most powerful attack possible in order to cut through with raw power. The shockwave he had produced wasn't that great, but it had been enough to cut through a mountain. "You did it, or maybe I should say, you've gone and done it," Deliza muttered. "Edgar, where are Jennifer and Diana?" asked Hines. "They're gathering magic stones from the vampires we defeated," Edgar replied. As for the big one there, he looked towards Chyparas' corpse disappointedly before returning to his usual, serious expression. "I don't think we're getting anything out of him. But how many noble-born vampires is that now? I'm sure that informant called Kinup can go to heaven now," said Deliza. Thanks to the informants, including Kinup, the former guild master of the Mages Guild, the vampires who had been hiding in the shadows of the Hartner Duchy were being hunted down one after another. The impact of this was spreading to the other duchies as well. At the personal request of Lord Belton, the Five Colored Blades were conducting an investigation of the incident in which the Demon King's seal had been removed in the underground cemetery that very few people knew about, while also hunting down the vampires. They were doing this because it seemed likely that there would be vampires who worshipped evil gods behind the removal of the Demon King's seal, but they still had no leads. In any case, they were hunting down big targets one after another, so they were being paid considerably well for their work as adventurers. Heaven, I have to wonder about that. Hines frowned. He was frowning because of the state that Kinup and his subordinates were in. They were currently little more than mannequins with beating hearts and moving lungs. They looked into empty space with saliva hanging from their mouths. But when they were asked questions about information on the vampires, they were able to speak fluently as if they had regained their sanity. Kinup and his subordinates had clearly been broken and manipulated by someone. "Don't feel sorry for them. They got what was coming to them," said Edgar. "They're guys who would kidnap us, kidnap Sullen and present her to this fatty that you just cut in two. More importantly, how much do you think Lord Belton knows?" he asked. "Considering the incident with Baronicus as well, I think it's certain that he's hiding something." Baronicus, who had been severely injured when the castle sank, had recently breathed his last breath without regaining consciousness. Edgar believed that Lord Belton had conducted a premeditated murder on his own subordinate. Baronicus had been running a pseudo-secret intelligence organization, so he likely knew a lot of secrets, and he was a traitor to humanity with ties to the vampire who was the prime suspect for the crime of removing the Demon King's seal. It would be problematic for Lord Belton if Baronicus didn't die silently. In fact, there were several noble families in the Hartner Duchy whose heads and children had suddenly gone somewhere to rest because they had fallen sick. They would almost certainly be announced to have entered priesthood and be spending the rest of their days living religious lives or to be dead from their illness. That was why Edgar was saying that there was still more than meets the eye, but Deliza shook her head. "I don't know about that," she said. "That lord, he seemed like he was keeping appearances up, but now it's more like he's trying to extinguish the fire under his own ass. Even the fact that he gave us this personal request and pays us generously with every vampire we hunt is all to try and recover his fallen image, isn't it? True, thanks to that rich kid, there's a rumor spreading in town that we're the Duke's best friends. Thanks to this, it seemed that the Adventurers Guild would soon abolish its unfair rule change against dampers. However, I don't mind being anyone's friend as long as the evil vampires and the followers of the evil gods are defeated," said Hines. "The problem is the Demon King's seal. I can't imagine that it was the doing of the man named Kanata. But I suppose as long as we're searching based on the information given by Kinup, who was manipulated by someone, We won't arrive at the truth. Edgar and Deliza nodded in agreement. Jennifer and Diana weren't here right now, but they would probably think the same. Lord Belton having an ulterior motive wouldn't be the end of the world, but ignoring the Demon King's fragment that had escaped the seal could indeed result in the world's destruction. This was true even if there were other pieces of the Demon King whose seals had been broken. Naturally, the Demon King had been sealed away in the age before Vida gave birth to her new races. Even the pure-breed vampires, who were feared now, had been normal people back then, fighting alongside the gods and the champions against the Demon King. It wouldn't be strange to think that the pure-breed vampires knew of the places where the pieces of the Demon King had been sealed. Members of Vida's races, such as the pure-breed vampires, had betrayed her and sided with the remnants of the Demon King's army. It was only a natural It was only a natural course of events for them to be removing the Demon King's seals and using his fragments simply for power. This was the result of the battles between heroes and great evil that had been written in 100,000 years of history. It seems that this man named Kanata possessed a powerful unique skill, but it's difficult to imagine that there was someone controlling him, said Hines. His actions were simply too, how to describe it? Senseless. That's true, it's strange, isn't it? Said Deliza. He repeatedly performed flashy, crudely executed crimes before reaching Nineland, even made the effort of going to the Adventurers Guild and declaring his name, and then suddenly he was a corpse buried in the collapsed underground cemetery. Nobody knew Kanata's past, where he had been born or what jobs and skills he had. And yet, his actions before he reached Nineland had been those of an outlaw who simply possessed great power. But he had somehow entered the underground cemetery that had been concealed in a very specific location. It was completely incomprehensible. This is just my intuition, but the man named Kanata might just have happened to be there and actually has no relation to the one who removed the Demon King's seal, said Hines. The thing that Hines found suspicious was the information that he had gained from informants other than Kinop and his subordinates, information that there was a noble-born vampire woman who had betrayed Berkine, and that she and her new master were out there somewhere. There was a beggar who had seen that vampire woman, the one allegedly known as Eleonora, going in and out of Kinop's mansion. From a distance, the beggar had seen a beautiful woman with red hair entering the mansion's back entrance, holding a large number of shopping bags. Nobody, not even the beggar who had happened to be given leftover foods at a spot a little distance away from the mansion, had given her a second glance. But Edgar, who had heard that there was a beautiful, red-haired woman in the city of Niyaki from one of the underlings of the Fangs of Dark Knights, felt that something was wrong when he heard about this information from the beggar. And upon conducting an investigation, they had found that she had vanished on the day the castle sank. It didn't look like the underling knew the name of this Eleonora's master, said Jennifer. It seemed as if he had been forbidden to speak the name by a pure-breed vampire. That must be an extremely powerful individual, said Diana. It could be a newly awakened pure-breed vampire. I think it is likely the one responsible for breaking and manipulating the minds of Kinop and his subordinates. The two of them had returned after collecting all of the materials. Now that the party had all gathered together, Hines began speaking. Even if it is a pure-breed vampire, we cannot simply leave someone who has undone a seal to release a fragment of the Demon King, he said. I cannot allow the existence of someone who plays with life and desecrates souls. There is no more big prey left in Nineland. Let's chase after the vampire called Eleonora starting from tomorrow, though this means we'll have to leave Zakat's trials for later. It's fine. The world is in danger, isn't it? Said Jennifer. There's no doubt that we're going to be victorious whichever one we go after, anyway. I'm sure Marty would forgive us as well, said Deliza. The party seemed to agree with Hines's decision, except for Edgar, the only one with doubt in his eyes. The time that a woman resembling the vampire Eleonora was spotted in Niyaki was the exact same time that the damp called Vandali appeared. Well, there is no information about Vandali in Nineland, but in the end, Vandali's root, if he is the son of that dark elf from back then, I never managed to find out how he crossed the border between the Mage Shield Nation and the Orborn Kingdom, passed through the Sauron Duchy into the Hartnett Duchy and then came all the way to the city of Niyaki. Are Hines and I just overthinking things? Edgar wondered whether Vandali had come to Niyaki through the same route that the five-colored blades had taken. He would have never imagined that Vandali had crossed the boundary mountain range that very few had ever crossed before. That was why he never bothered thinking about finding Vandali's trail in the cultivation villages to the south of Niyaki. Vandali was munching on the fruits that were similar to apples, together with Porvina and Rapisage. "Vansama, it seems that you are often eating fruits these days?" said Tara. "Yes, they're very hard, fresh, very hard fruit with sweet juice," said Vandali, mentioning the important feature of the fruit twice. "It looks like your jaw will get tired," Tara remarked. "But they're delicious, you know," Porvina told her. Sweet Rapisage groaned. These apple-like fruits were very delicious, but their flesh was as hard as a cow's thigh bone. With the superhuman strength skill, Vandali and the others could bite into them normally, but normal people would be literally unable to make a dent in them. They were so hard that the average ghoul and titan would soon get tired jaws while trying to eat them. Pete, the centipede monster that Vandali had equipped, didn't even pay the fruits any attention. "They're very hard, but for some reason, one of the ants I brought from the Eclipse King's orchard keeps giving them to me frequently," said Vandali. Every time Vandali passed by, this ant would always give him this fruit. He accepted them, and thus, he had begun to eat multiple of these fruits every day. Porvina and Rapisage were happy with this, though. "I'm sure that this ant was a well-known fruit merchant who sold a lot of fruit when it was alive," said Tara. Vandali didn't really remember if there had been a spirit like that, but he wasn't really concerned whether this theory was right or not. It was currently nothing more than an ant that he had tamed. "Now then, I have to come back to the real world and work hard in casting coins for the new currency," said Vandali. It seemed that Vandali's rest and escape from reality had ended. He exhaled as he looked at the numerous failed products in front of him, the stone containers that were filled with a blackish-purple, muddy liquid. The problem with introducing a new currency to Talersheim was the metal used as the raw material. Vandali had brought back coins of the Borm currency of the Orborm Kingdom with the exception of the most valuable platinum coins, which weren't usually handled by anyone other than royalty, nobles and wealthy merchants. The undead titan blacksmith, Datara, had accurately determined the relative ratios of the metals in the coins. As Talersheim would one day be trading with the duchies of the Orborm Kingdom with the exception of the Hartnett Duchy, it was important to match the value of the coins with the Borm. However, there were no stable sources of gold and silver in Talersheim. Gold and silver couldn't be mined in Duran's aquatic caverns. Gold and silver nuggets sometimes appeared in the dungeon's treasure chamber, but a sufficient amount to create coins couldn't be harvested with this method in a stable manner. It was unknown as to what principles the dungeon used to decide what treasures it generated in the treasure chamber, so they couldn't rely on it too much. Even the labyrinth creation skill couldn't freely manipulate the contents of the treasure chamber. Thus, Vandali had to create coins using the iron and copper that could be reliably mined, but if Vandali used iron and copper to create coins with the same value as the gold coins that were worth 1,000 Borms and 10,000 Borms, they would end up too large and heavy. They would be nothing more than large lumps of metal with not even a shred of convenience. Vandali had considered making paper money rather than coins, but he was still only able to produce sturdy Japanese paper in small amounts, and the printing technology available was still crude. Thus, it was better to use coins after all. The name of the currency was decided quickly though, Vandali remarked. The currency was known as the Luna. It was a play on words. The coins of the capital of the sun that was ruled by the Eclipse King were named after the moon. The design of the coins had been mostly decided. There were already prototype coins for the 1 Luna copper coin, the 5 Luna copper coin and half Luna iron coin. Datara had produced these coins with such quality that they were not at all inferior to the copper Imid and Borm coins. And then Vandali had come up with the idea of making metal in order to create coins worth 10 lunas or more. "When you mentioned the idea, I thought you were just being crazy as usual," said Datara. "Well, it should be considered an idea that isn't confined to the limits of common sense," Tara exclaimed. Porvina blinked upon hearing their words. "The two of you are saying the same thing," she muttered. She was a clever girl. The creation of metal that Vandali had in mind wasn't making an alloy like bronze, but using iron and bronze to create a new magical metal. Thus, both Datara and Tara's opinions were correct. Magical metals were metals filled with mana, with orichalcum at the top of the list followed by others such as mithril, adamantite, Damascus steel and obsidian. Other than orichalcum, it had been more or less established that all of these were created from lesser metals. Mithril and adamantite were produced when regular silver and gold were soaked in mana for tens of thousands of years, becoming naturally refined. Damascus steel and obsidian were refined from ordinary metals by skilled blacksmiths. Datara could apparently create obsidian if he had the materials. It was refined by using iron as a base and forging it for a whole day while adding a very tiny amount of mithril or adamantite. But he had said that staying up all night to produce 2 or 3 swords worth of obsidian was the best he could do. It would be impossible for him to create a currency with it. Of course, Vandali didn't have the blacksmithing skill, so it was impossible for him to mass-produce this metal with golem transmutation. Thus, Vandali had been trying to create a new magical metal by pouring mana into metal equal to the amount contained within mithril and adamantite. It would normally be impossible, but Vandali had thought that he could do it by pouring hundreds of millions of mana into the metal and using inanimataging, the spell that made time flow faster for its target. And it turned out to be actually possible. The iron and copper had essentially been soaked in death attribute mana for tens of thousands of years, transforming into magical metals, liquid metals. I did manage to make new magical metals, but I can't turn this into coins, can I? Said Vandali. They are liquids, after all, said Daitara. The metal was the same weight and size as what Vandali had started with, but he was troubled by the fact that they were black and purple, mercury-like liquid metals. Shall we call them death metal and dark copper for now? Vandali suggested. Although they were liquid, they were indeed magical metals. It was certain that they would possess special properties. Depending on their special properties, they would have their uses. Whether or not they could be turned into coins. It would be interesting if I could make armor out of liquid metal. I wonder if it's possible? Chapter 88, The King Pulls the Strings. At first, Vandali hadn't known how he should use death iron and dark copper, the liquid metals that he had created with his mana. But once it was heated, it turned out to be unexpectedly easy to process. This is a metal that one could only dream of. Daitara cried. The weights of death iron and dark copper were the same as the iron and copper that they had been created from, but since they were liquids, they could easily be shaped by pouring them into molds. They became harder as they heated up. At iron and copper's respective melting temperatures, death iron and dark copper turned into solids resembling solid iron and copper at room temperature. Of course, they returned to their liquid forms when they cooled, but if they were struck with hammers and forged in this solid state, they remained solid after cooling. Daitara poured death iron and dark copper into molds, heated them to a temperature where they became easily manipulated solids and then used his hammer to forge them. After doing this, they didn't return to their liquid forms even after their temperatures dropped. The swords and spears made from death iron were harder, tougher and sharper than those made from steel. But even when their blades were chipped, as long as the broken fragments were recovered, they turned back into liquid and fused back into the blade to restore its original shape. On the other hand, dark copper was more suited to being used for armor. It absorbed impacts well, withstood slashes and resisted mana as well. And like death iron, if it was damaged, the broken parts turned back into liquid and fused back into the armor. Also, perhaps because they were metals that had been transformed by death attribute mana, both metals had properties that made them easy to enchant with death attribute spells. It was simple to create swords enchanted with healing negation and deadly poison or shields enchanted with energy absorption. For some reason, it seems that only the Holy Sun, us undead and the ghouls can forge it. But that's part of its charm, said Daitara. Perhaps death iron and dark copper were affected by death attribute charm. Only Vandali was able to use it to create items. Anyone could use the completed products, however. But he now had Daitara, the other undead titans helping Daitara and the ghosts who had been trapped in the underground cemetery in Nineland, so this wasn't a problem. Incidentally, if Vandali wanted to turn completed products back into liquid metal to turn them into something else, he would heat them up, then use heat leach to remove the heat energy, and the equipment would return to liquid form after cooling down. By pouring death iron and dark copper that had been heated to the perfect temperatures into molds and hammering them a few times to harden them, Daitara succeeded in creating coins. And so, the 1,000 lunar dark copper coins and 100 lunar death iron coins were created. Is it alright for them to be this small? Vandali wondered, holding up one of the lunar coins between his fingertips. It seemed that he was worried about the fact that they were about as big as Japanese 1 yen coins. I am sure they will do, said Ches Air, full of confidence. But they were originally copper and iron, you know? Vandali told him. You are right, I am not so sure that we can trade these for 100 mid gold coins once we begin trading with other nations in the future, said Terra. This metal was originally copper, after all. Indeed, it is copper, said Sam. But they are harder than gold or silver, and they are pretty, said Zadyrus. I personally prefer these. Unlike gold and silver, these coins can be combined to make armor in times of danger, said Bazdia. I think this metal is better, too. I prefer hard metals as well, Vigoro added. Because the metals were originally made from iron and copper, Vandali, Tara and Sam were worried about whether the coins could be exchanged for gold and silver coins in the future. On the other hand, the ghouls were ignorant about monetary economies and valued metals not for their scarcity, but their properties when they were turned into weapons and armor. And then there was a third group of individuals smiling wryly, knowing that the other two groups were both wrong. I don't know if coins of this size would be considered of equal value to Amidon-born gold coins, but, Rita began. I think people will happily make the trade, said Saria. Your Majesty, not only merchants, but even nobles and royalty would produce mountains of gold, no, mountains of platinum coins in order to obtain these coins of death iron and dark copper, said Princess Livia. For some reason, these three seemed to think that the death iron and dark copper coins would have a lot of value. Vandali-sama, I agree. After all, these are magical metals that nobody in the world can create except for you. Not only the Mages Guild, but every nation will want it, said Eleonora. Indeed, the value of death iron and dark copper was unclear, but it would certainly be high. Just as Eleonora said, they were metals that had been created by Vandali, probably for the first time in the world's history. Even if their base materials were copper and iron, which were worth far less than gold and silver, Vandali was the only one who could create them. That was why its preciousness was unfathomable. Nobody could decide how much they were worth in gold or silver. I see, said Vandali. Then I suppose these sizes are all right for now, but before we begin trading in the future, we need to think about how to exchange money. In the future, it was possible that trading with foreign nations would result in the death iron and dark copper coins being depleted extremely quickly. There was also the possibility that they wouldn't even be given a second glance, though. And so the circulation of the lunar currency began, and for now, things were going smoothly. This is 10 lunas, and this is 50 lunas. Oh, the death iron coins shine like a rainbow when you hold them up in the sun. The purple color of the dark copper coins is pretty as well, isn't it? I wonder if I should gather more. I'm going to make a necklace out of death iron coins. The ghouls and orcuses, who weren't used to a monetary economy, seemed to be more interested in the coin's visible beauty rather than their convenience. Receiving money is something that we are truly grateful for, and even providing us with work. Thank you, thank you. I'm really glad I didn't die at the mine. Our hard work from now on will become our earnings, but I don't want to be a miner anymore. I suppose I'll go and be a farmer. At the farms, they apparently teach you singing and dancing for some reason as well. I'm tone deaf, you know. I suppose I'll go to the tofu factory. I can sew, so I suppose I'll be a seamstress. I shall start a business. It brings back memories of the days when I was selling fish in the Sauron Duchy. The ones who had been made to work in the slave-run mine, like Gopher and the other former refugees as well as those from the first cultivation village, had some experience with living in societies with monetary economies, so they accepted lunas without any problems. These non-fighting, creation-minded people were precious in Talersheim. Up until now, only a few of the ghouls and undead who were formerly craftsmen had been involved in Talersheim's farming, fishing and other industries. As former slaves in the mine, Gopher and the others had the mining skill. Now that they were free, it was only natural that very few of them would want to continue doing the work that they had been forced to do for 200 years, and miners in Talersheim needed to know how to fight. Because of this, it seemed that they would be employed in Talersheim's newly created factories or in the farms. The same went for those from the first cultivation village, but they were previously working as leather workers, seamstresses and merchants. It seemed that they wanted to find work similar to their previous jobs. It was doubtful as to whether there was work for them in the golem factories that had golems instead of manufacturing robots or farms with monster plants, but there were plenty of other jobs available. Vandali just needed to provide the golems with a little of his vast mana pool and they would work on and on. But in the end, they were just golems. They would accurately repeat the movements and protocols they had been provided, but their applications were limited. Most importantly, their ability to detect temperature differences that were too low to damage their mineral bodies and their ability to determine the current state of the product were too weak. Also, they were not suited to performing precise work. These flaws would be made up for by people, finally allowing Vandali to get closer to producing the items that could be produced in Earth's factories. It was the same concept behind the reason why tofu made by a craftsman tasted better than tofu produced entirely by machines. People are needed after all, said Vandali, feeling earnestly glad that he had visited the Hartner Duchy. Incidentally, a tax system had also been implemented. Income taxes had been introduced. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious with these instructions. Cesare protested. In Lambda, unlike those such as adventurers and mercenaries, each normal citizen was taxed a certain amount as a poll tax. This would include a tax of 40 to 50% of their harvests in the fields and their profits from their businesses. In the new Taylorsheim, this poll tax had been abolished and an income tax was collected from everyone's earnings. With this system, even those who earned little could theoretically pay taxes. Of course, this included a rule where those whose incomes were too low were exempt from paying taxes and a system where those with higher yearly incomes were taxed higher percentages of their incomes. The minimum tax was 5% and the maximum tax for those who earned the most was 20%. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Cesare urged Vandali. This tax system is one normally used for the Adventurers Guild and Merchants of the Commerce Guild. In order to apply this to each individual, we must determine each citizen's income. And the taxes are far too low for what the nation requires. Nobody could blame Cesare for voicing these opinions. With such a low percentage tax system, the nation would become poor in the not-so-distant future and become unable to maintain its structure. But Vandali remained calm as he responded to Cesare's concerns. The head of most of the ongoing projects in Taylorsheim is me, you know. He pointed out. You are right, said Cesare. Vandali's mana was essential for operating the magic items enchanted with the fermentation spell used for creating miso and soy sauce, as well as to provide power for the golems in each of the factories. Most of Taylorsheim's other industries were practically impossible without Vandali as well. The golems, monster plants, immortal ints and cemetery bees were all giving their blessings to Taylorsheim because Vandali was here. The Supplely distribution center in the remains of the Adventurers Guild was also only functioning because Vandali was providing it with the products to distribute. The members of the church, the stonemasons, the carpenters and the blacksmiths, Vandali was the leader of all of these groups. That was why determining the incomes of each citizen wasn't difficult. It was possible that it would become difficult in the future, but he simply needed to set up a system to do so before then. And it was unlikely that the nation would fall into poverty because the taxes were too low. In the end, the citizens were buying various things from Vandali, the nation's king, as they lived here. Actually, it was unlikely that things would be 100% problem-free, but Vandali had no choice but to simply use trial and error and make improvements whenever problems arose. I understand, said Cesare. Well then, please leave the details to me. Cesare, won't you quit being the general and become the nation's prime minister? Vandali asked him. No, I am a person who belongs in the military, Your Majesty, Cesare replied. But was it really alright for a military person to be doing so much work that a civil official should be doing? Some time passed after this conversation, and the end of summer was in sight. Vandali was having a nighttime meal to take a break from work in the underground chamber beneath Taylorsheim's royal castle, the place where he had defeated the dragon Golem and obtained the materials he had used to create Rapisage. Your Majesty, what is this? Livia asked. This is ramen, Princess Livia, Vandali explained as he showed her the contents of his bowl, various ingredients and some noodles submerged in a white soup. It's a dish that's similar to udon, but not quite. Incidentally, this is the tofu ramen I made at Braga's request. The soup base is miso with tofu, and the noodles are made by combining wheat flour and soybean flour in a certain ratio, and I've used fried tofu and freeze-dried tofu in place of pork fillet. For condiments, there's onions. It was an incredibly tofu-filled soybean-filled ramen. This was the time for isoflavones, whatever this meant. If there was one thing that Vandali wanted to quickly get his hands on, it was spring onions. And wouldn't the soup taste better with sesame seeds added to it? It looks very delicious, doesn't it? Vandali is so good at cooking. Why don't you have a bowl as well, Princess? Darcy suggested. Her tastes now matched those of her son, thanks to the mental encroachment skill. However, it seemed that Princess Livia hadn't been asking about the ramen. Thank you for the offer, but I was not referring to the ramen. Then were you referring to this? This is a wedding dress, said another Vandali separate from the one who was eating ramen, a Vandali who had been produced by using out-of-body experience and creating a clone. He was holding up the wedding dress that he was in the middle of making. Using countless needles and threads, Vandali was trying to create a wedding dress straight out of thread. Making dress paper and things like that turned out to be troublesome, so I'd thought about how I could do it, and recently I realized that I could simply make thread directly into clothes without using dress paper, he said. I'm in the middle of doing that, said another Vandali. Incidentally, these dresses are for Braga's brides, Marie and Linda. I've already taken their measurements, said yet another Vandally. Also, the material I'm using is the honey silk from the cemetery bees. 4 Vandalia's arms, which had divided into thin, thread-like lengths, were manipulating countless sewing needles. Vandally wanted to make glumes and cursed tools to do this one day, but it was precise work, so he had no choice but to do it himself for now. With this, I can make clothes without any seams. Frills, laces, flells. But working alone, making 2 or 3 dresses in one day is my limit, so I need to make a sewing machine soon. This is cutting it close. I suppose I should make a pedal-operated one? Based on what Vandally had seen in Nineland and Nierki, the clothes of Lambda were inferior to those of Earth. There were more dyes available and they were more vividly colored, but the designs of the clothing were limited. Vandally had put undead insects on Elinora as she walked around Nineland, and through their eyes, he had seen second-hand clothes being sold in the marketplace. As someone who had lived in modern Japan, he had thought that they looked considerably unfashionable. Vandally had only been a high school student back then, although his conduct hadn't been bad, it hadn't been particularly good, either. He had seen quite a few things in places such as the Lost and Found Center. That was why he planned to make various things. Things like bras, garter belts and stockings in particular. As for swimsuits, he planned to begin work on those once he found a fiber that wouldn't turn transparent when wet. Also, as someone aiming to achieve physical beauty equivalent to that of a Hollywood action star, he needed to find the right time to make men's boxer underwear as well. It's really pretty, isn't it? I'm sure everyone will be happy, and when we begin trading with other nations in the future, I think everyone will buy them, said Darsa. Yes, I think they are very wonderful, said Princess Livia. But it wasn't that I was wondering what that is. Her gaze was directed at the mass of meat that was being carried out of the resurrection device. It was an armful of meat with no hands, no legs and no head. There were throbbing blood vessels running along its red exterior surface, making it clear that, unbelievably, this thing was alive. Don't pay that too much attention, Darsa began. That's my 7th failed recreation of Mom, said Vandally. No, don't say it. Darsa cried. I'm not saying that that's your true form, so calm down, Vandally told her. Vandally had thought of the idea of using Glum transmutation to manipulate liquid death iron and dark copper to replace the resurrection device's damaged parts. As a result, the resurrection device had started working again, but when he tried to recreate Darsa's body with it, the device produced only lumps of meat. He had gone through a lot of trial and error, but no matter what he did, the device only created lumps of meat that bore no resemblance to Darsa. As you can see, there is only meat and blood vessels. If there were organs, I would add an orichalcum skeleton after it was finished. It seems making unnatural, temporary repairs to a resurrection device that was incomplete to begin with isn't going to be enough to recreate Mom, Vandally concluded. He had used the machine 7 times, but there was nothing he could do to stop the device from producing mysterious masses of meat. According to legend, the device was supposedly capable of creating bodies that were complete apart from their souls, but Vandaly's results were nothing close to that. But you know, it's kind of you say that, Vandally, but it's like I'm being told that this really is what I look like, so it's hard, said Darsa. I'm sorry, Olivia began. It's alright, it's just something that I've fooled myself into thinking. I'm sure that it's because the device is incomplete, said Darsa. Well, it does function, so I'm thinking of trying to make it more and more complete, said Vandally. Please wait a little longer, Mom. I suppose it doesn't work without the damaged parts being replaced by the originally used materials. Unlike other materials, I still can't make detailed shapes out of orichalcum, so should I make a homunculus after all? The level of Vandaly's Glum transmutation skill had increased, but not enough for him to be able to create precisely shaped components from orichalcum. The work needed to repair the device wasn't on the level of hand-making a semiconductor, but it was about as precise as trying to write letters on grains of rice. It wasn't simple to do. Perhaps it was better for Vandally to find an evil god, make a contract and create a homunculus to use as Darsa's body. He had gained the knowledge he required to do that at the Mages Guild in Nineland. Things like sacrificing virgins would be a tall obstacle for Vandally, but perhaps he could discuss this requirement with the evil gods. I wonder if you can negotiate with gods? I probably wouldn't be able to threaten them. In reality, he had already eaten an evil god, but as Vandally was unaware of this, he was under the impression that every god was certainly a superior being to him. I'll find the perfect evil god for the job, said Vandally. Livia-san, it seems that my son is going to run off to a bad religion. What should I do? What should I do in this situation? Darso asked. I think it will probably be fine, said Livia. Vandali had only been trying to reassure Darsa, but it seemed to have only made her more anxious. He hadn't said that he would necessarily join the evil gods, so why was she so worried? You have acquired the blacksmithing, thread reeling and enhanced physical ability, hair skills. The clothing skill has been combined with the thread reeling skill and the enhanced physical ability. Hair skill has been combined with the enhanced physical ability, claws, fangs, tongue skill. The levels of the cooking, enhanced physical ability, hair, claws, fangs, tongue and thread reeling skills have increased. Time passed, and it was now October. After finishing creating his currency and treating Gopher and the other former slaves with youth transformation, Vandali dropped by the cultivation village's harvest festival. He treated the villagers who were in poor health, and in return, he was treated with not the thin porridge made from rice and millets that he had been given before, but a dish resembling fried rice with proper ingredients, which had been made by stir-frying vegetables and meat along with southern rice. You're eating a lot. How many bowls is that? This is my third. Vandali had given the villagers 3 horned rabbits and a sack of walnuts as presents, so he wasn't holding back. Man, things were really crazy after you came back, said Festa. Something happened at the slave-run mine, you see. The outer walls were destroyed, the mine turned into an empty area of land and all of the soldiers and slaves turned into skeletons. What did you say? Is that true? I can't believe it, Vandali said with his usual expressionless voice and flat tone. He was the perpetrator, the main perpetrator at that, of this incident. Both his expressionlessness and flat tone were nothing out of the ordinary, so it seemed that the others hadn't noticed. The fact that Vandali's expression didn't change and reveal his true emotions unless he put conscious effort into it came in handy at times like this, too. Yeah. The wall was apparently destroyed from outside, so it was probably monsters that appeared. They didn't find any footprints or tracks, though. So the soldiers and slaves killed by the monsters probably turned into undead. It seemed that this was the conclusion reached by the Knight's Order that had investigated the incident. Vandali's effort of using golem transmutation to make monster bones resemble titan skeletons had paid off. Fortunately, it seems that the monsters that destroyed the outer wall moved south from where the mine was afterwards, though. Those investigating seemed to have thought that monsters were the culprits since there were no traces of armed forces having moved in the area, and since there were no monster tracks, the monsters had simply flown off somewhere else. I'm sure that there will be some who have made the connection between this event and the fact that the Demon King's seal was removed, but I'm sure they won't know. Nobody would dream that Vandali simply happened to have removed the champion's seal and released a part of the Demon King, his blood, during his quest to rescue the slaves at the mine. In fact, Heinz's party and members of the Church of Aldo were just as perplexed about the incident at the slave-run mine as Vandali had expected they would be. Considering the timing of the incidents, they probably weren't unrelated, but they wondered, why had the second incident occurred there? For the Hartner Duchy, it was quite an important location, as it was the duchy's only source of mineral resources other than dungeons. However, it was doubtful as to whether it would be a likely place targeted by the one who had undone the Demon King's seal, or the Demon King's fragment itself. It wasn't as if there had been other sealed fragments of the Demon King, nor were there other evil gods involved. As long as they didn't realize that the one who had removed the Demon King's seal was someone related to the former refugees of Talersheim, they would only be able to wonder about how strange it all was. And it seemed that they hadn't realized this fact yet. The fact that this cultivation village had gone unchecked was proof that those investigating the incident hadn't come anywhere near the truth. Vandali's familiars, the lemurs in the sky over the village, confirmed that no lookouts of spies had been stationed here. Thanks to that, the adventurers and knights passed through the highway from Niaki, so Oyaji-san was all excited about it, said Kasim. Now he's downhearted about the fact that we don't know if traveling merchants will come this way anymore, though. Kasim and his friends, who didn't know about the various things happening behind the scenes, were being carefree and enjoying the festival. Seeing them was truly therapeutic for Vandali. Things are hard on Lena though, since she has more work to do now. Come to think of it, weren't you 3 included in the group sent to exterminate the skeletons in the mines? Vandali asked. Actually, because of the lemurs, Vandali already knew that Kasim and his friends had been a part of the extermination force, but he decided to ask because he thought that it would be unnatural if he didn't. Of course we were. Just by participating, we were paid a reward that we can use for something other than food. Skeletons are rank 2. They're enemies that even we can defeat, and there were lots of people in the extermination force. And the men of the village and even some of the women have started hunting goblins to make the goppa goppa that you taught us about. They go out in groups of 5 and hunt them with handmade spears and bows, so there haven't been any goblins appearing near the village lately. Vandali had been watching through the lemurs, so he already knew this, but the people of the village were sturdy. In fact, it was their sturdiness that had brought them this far. But there was something different about those skeletons, said Kasim. They were attacking the other guys normally, but when it came to fighting us, it was like they were training with us. No, both our weapons and theirs were real, so we did defeat them properly, said Festa. It was supposed to be a real battle, and even though it was a real battle, it kind of felt like training as well. Also, I felt like there was something watching over us from somewhere as well, Zeno added. How to fight enemies wielding long weapons, enemies faster than them, enemies that outnumbered them, enemies that included both archers and shield bearers. Kasim's party felt that they had been tested on these subjects one after another. Of course, this had been the result of Vandali having given the skeletons instructions, using the lemurs and undead insects that he had left behind. He had used a countless number of winged insects and made them form letters to give orders to the skeletons. I've heard that undead tend to repeat the actions that they performed when they were alive. Perhaps those skeletons were previously instructors for new adventurers? Vandali suggested. I see, said Kasim. He and his friends seemed satisfied with this explanation. It seemed that they now assumed that the gaze that Zeno felt was also that of one of the skeletons. The truth was that none of those skeletons had been good people while they were alive, however. Come to think of it, what happened to that priest San? Vandali asked. I haven't seen him around. The priest of Alga's peaceful faction who had left the village, saying that he was heading for the city of Niaki, or rather, the simple life attribute mage and spy who was disguised as a priest, Froto. This man was nowhere to be seen in the village that was crowded with people for the harvest festival. We have no idea, either. It's not just this 7th cultivation village, it seems that the people of the other cultivation villages haven't seen him, either, said Kasim. I asked the people in the extermination force, and they said they didn't know of any priests like that. How about you, Vandali? Didn't you see him when you went to the city? Festa asked. Festa, it's awkward for me to approach the Church of Alga, Vandali told him. Unfortunately, I didn't see him there. I hope nothing has happened to him. The 3 young adventurers looked worried. Vandali nodded in agreement. Me too. But I think he's probably doing fine, though, he said. He still didn't know that Froto had been a spy. Even the lemurs would have been noticed if they got too close, no matter how transparent they were. At most, they could only watch people's movements from afar. The fangs of dark knights in the city of Niaki had been eliminated by Edgar, one of the members of the 5 colored blades, faster than Vandali had expected, leaving him with no way to gather further information. As a result, Vandali was under the impression that Froto was an unusually virtuous clergyman despite being a believer of Alda. By the way, what are you going to do now? Starting from tomorrow, I'm going to go around all of the cultivation villages and indulge myself in the harvest festivals, said Vandali. After that, I was thinking of going to the city to get some essentials and visit some distant relatives of my mother. Distant relatives of your mother, do you mean? No, my father was the vampire among my parents. Ah, is that right? No, I was sure that, if Eleonora had been present, there might have been a misunderstanding. Vandali knew that this bothered her quite a lot, so he was glad that he had come alone. Oi, the main event is starting soon, said the Oi-Argy from the Jack-of-all-trades store, calling Vandali over. The stone statue is going to be put in the shrine, so come over here. And so, that day's conversation ended there. Incidentally, the quality of the statue of Vandali created by the former stonemason Ivan was questionable. As the entire thing was made of stone, it had failed to portray the color of his hair, skin and odd-colored eyes, so it was possible that nobody would know that it was a statue of Vandali unless they were told. Skill explanation: automatic mana recovery, increased mana recovery rate. Those with the automatic mana recovery skill recover mana automatically no matter what they are doing when they are resting, exercising, or even in the middle of reciting the incantation for a spell. The increased mana recovery rate skill is a skill that increases the rate at which mana recovers while resting. Their names are similar, but they are separate skills. Automatic mana recovery restores a fixed percentage of the skill owner's total mana pool, while increased mana recovery rate reduces the amount of time required for mana to recover regardless of the amount of mana that needs to be recovered. Thus, those with large mana pools often desire the automatic mana recovery skill. However, the automatic mana recovery skill has the flaw of being difficult to acquire, and even after acquiring it, it requires training by expending all available mana to increase the total mana pool. In addition, the rate of natural mana recovery is dependent on one's health and mental condition, but many mages are aware that sleeping is a way of drastically increasing it, so they tend to be fixated on the environment in which they sleep and the number of hours they sleep. The fact that well-known mages carry pillows for traveling is even detailed in their biographies. Chapter 89, Acquiring Milk. The pure-breed vampires worshipping Hukaka, the evil god of joyful life.
Hello, hello. Okay. All right, guys. So that's what be the end of this sketch. Uh, yeah, sequence of me. I can't talk right now. I don't know why. But yeah, we just ended this sketching sequence, and for now, I think I did a really good job of finishing 3 sketches for today. I did get a bit rush the giraffe that I made over here. Maybe if I can have a bit more time, maybe I'll uh, do something more over here. I just think the head and maybe the legs. But overall, I think it's uh, projecting the image that I was imagining, and I was starting to create this. For the Ankylosaurus over here, yeah, went for more boxy kind of art style for him. Very tanky, very uh, yeah, more like a warlike style of design. Uh, if I put this in a tank battle, maybe it will have an advantage due to its design. That tail that I designed over here, maybe it will have some explosive or something, or some laser attacks. Yeah. One thing I was kind of disappointed in making this too was like I forgot again to add some weapons on it. That's why I went full out on the giraffe. I put 2 huge guns on the back. This looks pretty good. I would probably think of a different design next time if I would decide to make another giraffe, kind of a mech or some Bronchiosaurus style. But yeah, the main idea is putting 2 guns on the back, rear back. I kind of got the idea from that Zoid anime that I watched before, the very first Zoid anime I watched. Having this weapon, a huge weapon on the back from that Bronchosaurus. But this time I added 2 guns instead of 1. hmm Now we proceed for the first sketch that I did. I'm very happy with this, the raptor. Yeah, still looks like a raptor and has like a more of a I might say a bit of organic style of mechanic structure. Like the tubes looks like they're veins or something or muscles, and spikes they look like feathers. Went for a more realistic style of a raptor design, and here we have it. I really love how I made the claws on the foot. They look really sharp and deadly. But sadly, I didn't add some weapons that uh, that I should have thought of before starting this. Maybe a Gatling gun or something on the back, maybe. But he does look like more of a scout type of design, like it would infiltrate an army camp and start shredding people with its claws. hmm Yeah. think this is pretty much a wrap for this particular designs over here. I'm thinking of adding something very simple over here, and then I'll just proceed to save it in my social media. Mm, yeah. Now that I'm looking at this, I think it's pretty nice. The gun turret. Mm, but yeah. Okay, guys. So far for the story, also for the Dead Mage who doesn't want a fourth time. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, so the development for the story. Yeah, we went back for him. Vandal's counter development. He went and saved the slaves that were in the mines, former titans that were um, enslaved in that place. Rescued them, and also some few human slaves also. And the good part of it also was uh, he managed to gain a apprentice from uh, that guy. I can't remember his name again. Uh, yep, I can't find it. But anyway, he got a an apprentice, and in the near future, he would be proven to be a good asset and a good partner for Vanelli, because now Vanelli has somebody to talk with his ideas, experiments, and stuff that he would probably apply in the near future. Yeah. Uh, but so far, the plot hasn't progressed in a more exciting event. But other than that, the development for the country and his people is pretty interesting. I would say that learning more about what to supply for his people, including creating currency, materials, and factories that he has been making. And the other thing also is his. He also has the ability to create labyrinths now, dungeons where he can go and uh, have the have his people level up in that place. Although there are soulless yet, the monsters that were being created in that dungeon, he is starting to apply some souls in them using his dead mage ability, and it's causing some few problems for uh, Rod Courtney, was trying to reincarnate his using his system, causing some errors. I could imagine some few error problems coming out on his computer or something. But yeah, so far that's pretty much the story going on, and let's look forward for more of the uh, plot that we'll be adding in the near future. But yeah, so this is pretty much what I've been doing for today. Uh, I could say it's a pretty good success. I'll just add something little over here, or maybe my logo. Yeah, maybe just my signature. And then I'll just upload this in my social medias. Link is under the description below, and just check it out. I have a lot of my wonderful arts that I've done back in the days, and you can check it out. But yeah, this is just a practice of me creating mechanical creatures. I'll see what I can do next sketch. I may need to move on now that I've finished some sketches, like from the very first one over here to this one. Yeah, from modelings that I created, men and women. Now this mechanical animals. I'll think of something that I will do. Depends. Maybe I'll try to do some concept arts and or some illustrations for some few characters, or maybe fan arts. Let's just see what I would decide in the near future. Let's get some good ideas from the things I've did here over here, and yeah, Once that I've upgraded my sketching now, I'll probably improve my coloring also. Because yeah, right now my coloring is not that good, and I would like to improve that. And most of some of my art skills, including perspective and lighting. Okay, so I think that's enough of me talking, and I will end this stream over here. And I will look forward for you people to watch more of my stuff, my creations of wonderful arts, or just watching me play Monster Hunter Rise. And yeah, that's pretty much what I'm yeah about to say. And once again, thank you again for watching this. Leave a like and subscribe if you like these things that I've been doing. I'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.